Oh, he's muted. Yeah, muted.
Abdul, you're muted.
Oh man, that's a really bad start. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everybody to another episode, another stream of the Thought Adventure podcast. We've really missed you guys. It's been 3 weeks this time, so we're happy to be back. Today we're discussing the argument from Divine Hiddenness against the existence of God, or against theism, which is one of the most popular arguments against the existence of the theistic or God, or the God of monotheism, and it's a very interesting argument. I think it's closely related to the problem of evil that we discussed last time. So we're hoping this is going to be an interesting and fruitful stream, inshallah. Panelists, assalamu alaikum. How are you guys doing? Hope you're well.
Alaikum salam. I'm a bit surprised. We've got Isan here saying he's only just had to subscribe so he could post. Why is he not already subscribed? He's been on the show like God knows how many times.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
Yusuf, man, how's your COVID, by the way? Because you had COVID.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Yeah, I'm much better now. I did a test at the end of my isolation period and it came through negative, so I didn't have it then. But I still have it now a bit of a phlegmy cough. But alhamdulillah, yeah, much better than I was.
Alhamdulillah, that's good. But yeah,
so I'm just gonna pull up the argument here, maybe a simple form of the argument that will get us started. So premise, conclusion. Premise 1: if God exists, there are no non-resistant non-believers. Premise 2: there are non-resistant non-believers. Conclusion: God does not exist. So it's a valid argument. The form is valid. If premise 1 and 2 are true, the conclusion follows. So take it away, guys. Whoever wants to start, inshallah.
Maybe just really quickly before, I just wanted to maybe add one or two key points before going directly into the argument. I'll let the other brothers go directly into the argument. But I think this argument, divine hiddenness and also the problem of evil, tends to be an argument which says, if God exists, God would want a particular type of world. Because we don't see this particular type of world, therefore God doesn't exist. So, with the problem of evil, it's like, if God exists, there would be a world with no evil. Because there is a world with evil, therefore God does not exist. Yeah. So similarly, this type of argument, if you really break it down, the sort of the hidden assumptions is to try to understand what God would want in terms of creating. And so in this situation, if God exists, he would want a world where there's no disbelief. Because there's disbelief, therefore God doesn't exist. Yeah. So in essence,
non-resistant disbelief, to be more specific.
Yeah, and to be honest, there's obviously there's lots of different variations to this particular type of argument, the divine hiddenness. Yeah, and I think we're going to try and go through as many of the different variations as possible. But I'm just saying is that in the minds of the audience, it's really important, because a lot of times these types of arguments is really trying to understand what would happen if God exists. And what type of world would God want to create? Yeah, that's the idea. So I just thought I'd just get it out there, so people.
Yeah. So I think you're right, and I think, of course, I mean, they can provide reasons for why they make that move, and I think the way it's typically done is that there are certain consequences or entailments that follow from the characteristics or attributes of God that theists attribute to God. So let's say perfection, right? Perfect love, or perfect moral goodness, right? They would want to make their argument on that basis, that from the perfect love or perfect moral goodness, certain aspects should follow. Since they do not, therefore this specific God does not exist. So I mean, we're obviously going to reject that. I think for me, the most obvious is to reject premise 1, and obviously provide reasons for why we reject it. But I think there have been some philosophers who have tried to resist premise 2 as well, although that's much more difficult. But it's I mean it's out there. There are objections to premise 2. So Jake, why don't you tell us your thoughts on the argument and which premise you would attack?
Yeah, so let me just pull it up here to make sure I'm getting the order right. If God exists, there are no non-resistant non-believers. I mean, I would just start off by rejecting premise 1. So I know that some of the philosophers give other arguments in support of premise 1. One of them is the one, what's his name, Schellenberg from Love, right? So he says premise 1, if there is a God, he is perfectly loving. If a perfectly loving God exists, reasonable non-belief does not occur. Premise 3, reasonable non-belief occurs. Premise 4, no perfectly loving God exists. Hence, there is no God. So I can say, okay, I'm fine with premise 1. If there's God, he's perfectly loving. Premise 2, if a perfectly loving God exists, reasonable non-belief does not occur. I would probably reject that premise. And then premise 3 as well, reasonable non-belief occurs. I probably, more so than you guys, I'd probably reject that as well. But to start off, premise 2, if a perfectly loving God exists, reasonable non-belief does not occur. I mean, what's the motivation for that? Why should I think that that's true just because a loving God, a perfectly loving God exists, that there can't be someone who doesn't believe in God and yet is reasonable? What's underpinning that? It seems to be an assumption, and I just don't think that it's correct. So I would say that that's false. And then I'd even make the stronger point that I don't think reasonable non-belief occurs. So I think that somebody, and this is much stronger, I think that somebody who completely rejects that God exists, I would say, does not take a reasonable position. And obviously we would have to go into arguments on that, but that's part of what our show is about, is to try to provide rational justification for the belief in God. And I think that we've done that quite sufficiently, although there are other points that I would want to make on that to say why I don't even think somebody who doesn't believe in God could hold a rational or reasonable position. But then I also want to distinguish between just the belief in God and the submission to his will and the worship of that one God. Because in Islam, simply recognizing that God exists is not sufficient to be to have salvation, to be saved, so to speak. You can recognize that a creator exists and just say, well, yeah, the creator exists, but I hate him and I don't want to worship him and I don't want to submit to him. I don't like him. And to say that, that would be enough. No, God is not concerned with merely people recognizing him. You have to give God his just due and actually submit to his will and worship him. Otherwise, all this other stuff is just, just a belief in God alone is not sufficient. And so I think this is important to point out because it seems to me that these arguments are only concerned with the mere belief in God or recognition that a creator exists, where, it seems to also be underpinning it. Well, how would we be punished? Especially how would we be punished on Islamic paradigm eternally for not believing in a God that exists? And I know this isn't explicit in the argument, but it seems to be an extension of it. How would we be punished eternally for not believing that a God exists if we don't have sufficient evidence for him and we could have reasonable disagreement and say that he doesn't exist? And I'm simply saying that you're not punished merely for not recognizing that God exists, even if you recognize that he exists, but you don't submit to him and you say, oh, well, yeah, God exists, but I hate him and I'm going to hell. And that's the end of the story. Yeah.
Iblis is a perfect example of that.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, that's not really what Islam is concerned with. Islam is not concerned with merely the recognition or belief in God. It's submission to him. Like you brought out, Shaitan is a perfect example who knows that God exists. He had direct communication with God and experienced God, and yet said, well, the hell with you. I'm doing my own thing. And it's just, so I think that's an important thing to note as well. And like I said, going back to the original argument, the idea that, well, if God exists, then there are no non-resistant non-believers, I just don't see why that's necessarily the case. We could also imagine a situation where you can say, well, yeah, if God wanted to, he could create the world in such a way that, in the clouds that go across the sky, like every 5 minutes, it just says, oh, as a reminder, God exists. Or, he could create something so obvious like that as an everyday reminder. But why couldn't we think of, well, maybe the case with God is, because this life is a test, which is part of the Islamic narrative, is that he's created the world in such a way and created human beings in such a way that we have sufficient evidence to know that God exists, which I truly believe, and I would support that as we try to do on here with rational argumentation. But also at the same time, he does not want to compel people to believe. Okay, so he's not interested in compelling people to believe. And so is the evidence that God exists sufficient enough without necessarily compelling people to believe? Yes, I think that's the case. And the divine hiddenness argument wants to argue that no, it's not the case. And then, so what I'm saying is eventually, I think it's going to wind up having to go back to evidence for God anyway. And that's going to have to be the sort of deciding factor on this argument. So this argument on its own, I don't think achieves what it's meant to achieve, because I think eventually it's going to have to go back a step back further to, well, what actually is the evidence for God. And, so that's where I think it's going to be settled anyway.
Perfect. Jazakallah khair for that. So, I mean, Sharif, I saw that I'm supposed to be playing the shaitani advocate, so the devil's advocate here. So I'm going to be pushing back a bit, and I'm going to be asking you, because I see a difference between non-reasonable non-belief and non-resistant non-belief. Do I need to elaborate, or do you see the difference?
No, elaborate. Because I understand obviously reasonable non-belief. Yeah. But what do you mean by non-resistant?
So the way the argument is framed is that so let's assume that belief in God is perfectly rational, right? And there's no reasonable non-belief. Okay, so all non-belief is reasonable, but there still could be non-resistant non-belief in the sense that a person can just be irrational, not willingly. Maybe he's just, not, intellectually up to the level, but he wouldn't be resisting a relationship with God. He'd be sincere. And I think what the argument is trying to do is trying to say that if God is perfectly loving and he's this perfect moral being, then he should always be open to a relationship. I know Schellenberg, the father of this argument, he puts it in that way, that he should always be open to a relationship. So let's assume that non-belief is irrational. Could it still be non-resistant in the sense that a person can be sincere but not see the reason in believing in God?
So I think there's a few things here. I think firstly is, what I would probably do is I'd probably take the argument, which is, why is there disbelief in the world? Is it against, quote unquote, God's plan? Does God want to create a world in which there is no disbelief? We know from an Islamic paradigm that if God wanted to create a world with no disbelief, that he could create that world. In fact, in the Quran, it mentions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions to the effect that if he wanted to create everybody under one deen, one religion, he would have done that. Yeah, but that wasn't part of God's plan. So this idea that God wanted to create a world in which everybody was a believer, but then there is some disbelief, that's not a premise that we hold on to as Muslims. We understand that God wanted to create a world and created a world in which people will be tested as to see whether they were going to be sincere in their belief and their desire to submit to the Creator or not. Yeah, and gave human beings the free will. So that's really important, because we don't take a particular paradigm of what God wanted to create. Yeah, so that's very important. And I think this is why a lot of these types of arguments tend to be arguments that are addressing a Christian or a hidden Christian paradigm with regards to the understanding of belief in God, that God wants this relationship, this communion with human beings. He created human beings so that he could love them and they could love him. And then something happened with human beings, and that they had this fall of Adam and they corrupted their nature, etc., etc. That's not the Islamic paradigm. The Islamic paradigm was that this universe, this world, was created as a test for human beings, and therefore we're tested. And one of the tests is, are we going to recognize our Creator and submit to our Creator or not? And Jake's already answered that question, which is that it's not about necessarily acknowledging that God exists. We know from an Islamic paradigm that Iman, belief, is not just simply believing in God with your mind. It's rather submitting with the heart, testimony upon your tongue, testifying upon your heart, submitting upon your heart, recognizing also that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, and also some incorporate this idea of submission upon the limbs as well, or testifying upon the limbs, meaning you act according to what you believe as well as a manifestation of your belief. So this is what Islam seeks to establish. Now, it has been the case that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given very evident signs for human beings, because an argument that tends to be brought forward is, well, why don't we have these types of miracles that were given to Moses, Musa alayhi salam, or Isa alayhi salam? Yeah, why don't we have that today? Well, there were times where people were given very evident miracles, but they still persisted in disbelief. So it's not it. So again, even this idea that there should be more evidence to such an extent that it compels the mind to acknowledge belief in a creator is not necessarily the case, that even if you had that, you would willingly submit yourself to the creator. And again, the shaitani example has been brought up as well, that they acknowledge. And, we've got examples as well. There's many people on, atheists, like Dr. Lawrence Krauss. He had a debate with Uthman Badr in Australia, one of the brothers out there. And in the debate, he said, even if God existed, I would not prostrate myself to him. Yeah. So, and there's a quote by Stephen Fry, who's an actor and comedian in the UK, where when he's told, well, what if God exists and you go to the pearly gates, what would you say? And he said, bone cancer, what's that? Yeah. And he starts saying, I would accuse God of committing great injustice and evil. Yeah. That you're not worthy of worship or submission. So we have examples like that. Yeah. So it's not the case that from an Islamic paradigm, just because you have evidence, even sufficient evidence, like miracles as an example, that people would therefore submit, because human beings have free will, and it's about submission, not just acknowledgement. That's sort of a really woolly general point. The second point is this: is all of this presupposes that there isn't sufficient evidence at the moment. Yeah. So irrespective of miracles and what the prophets did in the past, do we have sufficient evidence to establish a belief in a creator? Because the presupposition in this is, again, there isn't sufficient evidence. And because there isn't sufficient evidence, God would have given us sufficient evidence. And that's the reason why people disbelieve, and therefore God doesn't exist, because God would provide sufficient evidence. But that presupposes there isn't sufficient evidence. What evidence would we be looking for? I think somebody in the comments section, he said, well, evidence of a Bigfoot would be footprints of Bigfoot. Yeah, that would be evidence for a Bigfoot. Yeah, because we don't have evidence of footprints of Bigfoot, therefore Bigfoot doesn't exist. What evidence would we expect of a necessary being? the evidence of a necessary being would be contingent beings. Contingent beings is what we observe, yeah, and therefore it would therefore logically entail that a necessary being with intentionality created and was the cause for contingent beings. So again, there is sufficient evidence. That sufficient evidence, some people may acknowledge, some people not. And the third point, sorry to go on, sorry, Rob, you can jump in, by the way.
It's okay.
The third point is let's say this point about reasonable disbelief. Let's say even if we grant people have reasons not to believe in God or reasons not to believe in Islam, there is within the Islamic paradigm evidence or certainly a position that says that a disbeliever, a kafir, and somebody who's judged on the day of judgment will be judged based upon the information and evidence that they have, what occurred to their mind. If they had, quote unquote, reasonable disbelief, yeah, either had certain reasons not to believe in Islam, let's say generally, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we believe, will take that into account. It's not the case that he will be punished, yeah? So it's not a case of the fact that he didn't see the evidence and therefore he's going to be punished anyway. No, we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will punish him based upon what he knew, not based upon the fact that he didn't see a particular evidence or an argument. And there's more to be said about reasonable disbelief, because you could argue, yeah, it's reasonable at a certain point in time for somebody not to believe in God. They may have certain reasons, but over a lifespan, yeah, over the various arguments that come to them, then you can say, well, the person's no longer just being reasonable in his disbelief. He's rather being obstinate within his disbelief as well. So, yeah.
Jazakallah khair for that. I mean, one of the thoughts that comes to mind, and I'm going to ask you this, Yusuf, is about. I mean, could there exist a sincere non-believer who isn't so forget about Stephen Fry, Richard Dawkins, and all these guys who say that if they see God, if they walk up to the pearly gates, they would still reject God. Think of somebody who would accept God if he sees the evidence, but he just hasn't seen it. Is there do you think, like, maybe more psychological than anything, do you think there could be a non-resistant non-believer who is sincere, who, if presented with the evidence, provided he has the intellectual capacity to grasp it, he would believe, but he just hasn't seen it? He's seeking a relationship with God, or at least he's not resistant to it. Does that person exist? Because I mean, if we're accepting premise 2 that non-resistant non-believers exist, then that person does exist. So what do you think?
Yeah, I would say definitely, because you've got to keep in mind that a life is a series of moments, and if you're just pointing, sorry, I got series opening up for some reason. So yeah, a life is a series of moments, and you may come across someone who's a disbeliever now, who is sincere, who in the future will become a believer. They may be at the very beginning of their life. We've seen shahadas where people have taken it, in their 80s or however long, much, much later on in their life. And maybe sometimes some people go through a process of several decades of research before they eventually submit. And that person could, in that state of disbelief, very well be sincere. So yeah, I would say that is the case, that you can have someone who sincerely does disbelieve, and that they haven't come across all the arguments, they haven't come across the things that are gonna make it click, so to speak.
And you think they could die in that state, right?
It's possible. It's possible they could die in a sincere state. Whether or not that's a rational position is obviously a completely separate thing.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. So, because for me, that's one of the most obvious flaws with the way Schellenberg's argued. I've read and seen him argue about one of the premises in one of his formulations, that God should always be open to relationships if he is a morally perfect or perfectly loving God. I mean, of course, there's a caveat there. I mean, we would have to discuss what perfectly loving means, because I think perfectly loving from within a Christian and an Islamic paradigm are radically different. So there's also that aspect that I have with this problem, and the problem of evil as well, is that there's an aspect of subjectivity with regard to how you judge the consequences of certain perfections, and these are the kinds of arguments you hear some atheists making as well with regard to perfection, right? Because when you talk to them, perfection and moral superiority and stuff like that, they always do put on that subjective lens. Well, according to who? Well, subjective perfection is a value judgment. So how are you going to make that judgment? But so let's just grant the standard meaning of perfect love. And one of the problems I have is the bold claim that God should always be open to a relationship, even during this finite life. Like he wouldn't even consider, the fact that the possibility of this person getting into an eternal relationship with God in the hereafter as sufficient answer, because then there's that first part, that finite life, where he would regard as lacking when you consider it in the light of a perfectly loving God. And I think the problem with that is that I think that's a very broad assumption. It's a bold assumption to make that it will always be the case. And I think this has to do, I was discussing it with a friend a couple of days ago, John Fisher, and it has to do with doxastic volunteerism and involunteerism. Now, what those words mean, there's just a very fancy way of saying, like, of describing two different positions in philosophy, where you are able to choose your own beliefs versus involuntarism, where you are incapable of choosing your own beliefs. And I think the idea that God isn't immediately available to anybody who just searches for him, like God, the existence of God couldn't be as obvious as 1 + 1 = 2. 1 + 1 = 2 is always obvious to anybody. You couldn't not believe that 1 + 1 = 2.
It's not that. I asked my daughter the other day, what's 1 + 1? And she said 18, because that's her favorite number.
I'm sure she doesn't understand what the words mean, though, right? Because she couldn't, right? Because if you brought her two toys, she'd know that there are two toys there.
Well, I did it
right?
with my fingers. I was like, "How many's that?" She said 1. I said, "How many's that?"
Then we're dealing with a different problem. Yeah, but assuming that everybody does believe that 1 + 1 = 2, and nobody could believe that 1 + 1 = 5 or 18, then that's the kind of belief that you can't not believe. So you're coerced into that belief. You don't have a choice not to believe it. And I think the problem is, if belief in God was like that, then the theistic position, or the theistic narrative that this life was created as a test to test our moral conduct, it just entirely collapses. Because if every time you look at the sky you see God and you see heaven and hell, then how is anything you do morally significant? How is it morally significant? If I put a gun to your head and I'm trying to test, see, okay, what you're going to do. You need to do the right thing. If you do the wrong thing, I'm going to shoot you. And you know for a fact that you're going to get shot in the head. And you know that, with absolute certainty, then, you're abstaining from doing immoral actions is not really morally significant. You're just being forced not to do moral acts. So I've always thought this idea that, if God's existence was just as obvious as that, well, the whole theistic narrative would kind of collapse. So I feel that this is one part of the argument that doesn't really take the theistic position seriously, because I think, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think what it is that what you're giving is a possible argument. Yeah, so there's a possible way of explaining why it's not obvious, in one particular way. So it's basically saying, well, this divine hiddenness argument doesn't try to reduce the belief in a creator as a logical contradiction. It's about evidential. Is it plausible, given the state of the evidence as it is, and our understanding of the nature of a creator? And you're giving one plausible argument. But let's take another plausible argument, or possible argument, Let's say that what God wants is not just belief. He wants what Jake said, submission. Let's say this is the best way to create the most number of people to submit to God, i.e., the idea that it's not in a way which is directly accessible, like 1 + 1 = 2, but rather it requires sincerity to seek out this intellectual answer, this rational answer, that there is a creator that therefore you need to submit to. So let's say that's actually the best possible world to allow the most number of people to submit, is one where people will submit when they've gone through this sincere, rational, having humility process in order to come to the existence of a creator. So there's sufficient evidence, one, and secondly is that this is the best way to get to the stated purpose, which is to have the maximum number of people saved.
Yeah, I want to say something about this comment, because saying the argument doesn't imply that believing in God would be like believing that 1 + 1 = 2. Yes, it does imply that. It does imply that, because it implies that mere non-resistance gets you to God. So, I mean, the only way you could not believe that 1 + 1 = 2 is if you were like psychologically resistant to it or something, or if you had some problem, like mental problem or whatever, a deficiency in your ability to understand the world around you. But then the idea is, as soon as you're non-resistant to the idea, you're there. Because what Schellenberg does is that he says that God should always, that means there shouldn't be a moment where you are non-resistant to the existence of God where you're not already in a relationship with God. So you should instantly see it, and that's just that's just coercive belief right there. I mean, that's just something you couldn't choose not to believe. I mean, if it were like what you're saying, and the argument doesn't imply that belief in God would be like believing that 1 + 1 = 2, then we're fine with that, because then there could be non-resistant non-believers that get into some sort of gradual journey towards belief in God, which I think is honestly more meaningful than this just instant zap in your head as soon as you're non-resistant. So yes, I think the argument does imply that believing in God would be like believing that 1 + 1 = 2. So I.
Oh, did you mute?
Sorry. Does anybody else have anything to say about premise 1? Because I think we've dealt with it fairly well. Of course, there's much more to say, but Jake, Sharif, Yusuf,
I would just push for justification even more so on it. Like why is it like? I think you've pretty much just said the same thing, really. But like, why is it the case that if God exists, there are no non-resistant non-believers? I'd say that there needs to be a separate argument to justify this premise, because it's just being put forward as a statement. We don't necessarily just have to go on the defensive. And
sorry, you're talking about premise 1, right?
Yeah. If God exists, there are no non-resistant believers. Why is that the case?
Yeah, well, normally they provide defenses of it from the perfect being theology, as in God's moral perfection, God's perfect love, and what that entails. Like the consequence of God's perfect love is that he would always want to be, or he would always be open to relationship with non-resistant finite beings.
So that was the next thing I wanted to comment on. So this always being open. So even within our theology, we understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the doors for repentance are always open. So he is always open to it. The issue is whether or not the person is going to reciprocate that. So, you can conceive of God being always open to developing a relationship with people, and people resisting that opportunity. And to sort of add further to it. So we have this understanding as well, that everyone is born upon the fitrah. And there are arguments and essays that can corroborate this as well. So the essay by Paul Bloom, which talks about natural religion is natural. It's a very short essay, but this article shows, children, even when they're raised by atheistic parents, wherever they are on the planet, they naturally come to certain beliefs. That is, they believe, for example, in some sort of transcendental power. They believe in mind-body dualism. So they believe in a soul. They believe in life after death. They believe in everything having an innate purpose. Like there's a lot of beliefs that children come to that are theistic, but all by themselves. Obviously, they're very vague, but they're there. And within the Islamic paradigm, we have this notion that we do testify prior to our birth that there is only one God. And Allah says that, and we say this, and then when we're held to account on Judgment Day, that we won't have any excuses because we've already testified. And this idea of kufr is this covering up. So that there is, I really do think this, that there is a innate natural position, that belief in God is the neutral position, or belief in the supernatural, belief in a higher power is a neutral position. And then there's a lot of complexity that goes on to cover it, which is what kufr means, to cover. And
so this is a good segue to premise 2, Yusuf. So because it seems like you're saying that non-resistant non-believers don't exist. Is that what you're saying, or because
what do we mean by non-resistant again? Non-resistant.
So as soon as you don't have any like rational or psychological, if you don't have any ulterior motives to not believe in God, right? Like you're sincere, you're just looking for the evidence. You should be able to believe in God. Like there's nobody who is sincere in that way, who doesn't have that kind of internal resistance, who doesn't believe in God. Because as soon as they're non-resistant, they immediately believe in God. The premise 2 says that there are people who are non-resistant and still don't believe.
See, I think with premise 2, you can accept that you can have some people who are non-resistant who don't believe in God. The question is that could they be that way when, over a period of time where there are different arguments, where they think about it themselves, where they contemplate, I think that's the problem. That's when you find that, they go from being reasonable to a position of obstinacy. Because there's just too many arguments, too many angles by which you look at when it comes to the existence of a creator that seems to indicate, even like, I think Yusuf was obviously mentioning about the fitra of a human being, but even many atheists will acknowledge, that belief in religion is natural in human beings, and they might give some sort of evolutionary argument for it. But what they're basically saying is, but this is what the basic point is. It's we're inbuilt, we're innate. We want to create societies where we have a metaphysical or supernatural beliefs, or beliefs in a theistic God or creator. We want to do that. This is what we want to do. And then we've got good rational reasons to establish this, whether that's transcendental arguments, whether it's arguments from consciousness, whether that's contingency arguments or different cosmological arguments for the existence of a creator. All of these things seem pretty reasonable to be pushed in the direction of belief in a creator. So you might have at a particular moment somebody who's non-resistant and has a reasonable disbelief. But over a period of time, and look, my own experience, I've never come across a atheist or a disbeliever, non-Muslim, who was sincere, and looked at the arguments and didn't become a Muslim. I've never come across a person who I felt he's a really sincere guy, but he just doesn't want to be a Muslim. Every discussion I've had, and I know that's anecdotal, so it's not justification for evidence, but I'm just saying from my own experience, that's what I've seen. And I've seen the opposite, where I've seen people who will say to me, and Jake and you guys have heard it as well, where they'll say, you have a reasonable, logical position, but I just don't believe it. So they will accept that it's logical and reasonable, but they just don't want to do it. And there's something psychological factors regards to this. Maybe it's because in their mind they've got Christianity in the background, or the negative aspects of religions and things like that pushes them from really accepting the logical, rational position.
I think one of the the burdens this argument carries, one of its costs, and is the idea that God should always be open to a relationship. So you don't have that transitional phase. They can't afford that. It's that non-resistant non-believers don't exist. So, and the problem also, another issue is that, I mean, because if you do allow for a quick transition, that okay, so there's a period, then the person instantly sees it. Well, there's going to be an arbitrary. I mean, how long is that period going to be? How long are you going to allow for a person to transition from resistant to non-resistant, then theist, or is it resistant then theist instantly? Because if it's resistant, then just the zap in the head and instantly theist. I mean, I think that's ridiculous. I think that's absolutely ridiculous. But if you're allowing for a transitional period, well, it's always going to be arbitrary. How long does the argument allow for in terms of this transition from non-theism to theism, and in that case, we're just going to appeal to some kind of like gradualism in people, in non-resistant non-believers, in a non-resistant non-believers journey towards God. And exactly. I think that's the way it should be. Yeah.
Yeah, well, what you're saying is correct, because what do they mean? Do they mean non-resistance to to acceptance? Are they saying that just because you have to go through a set of arguments and understand the evidence, does that negate belief in a creator? It doesn't really make sense. And just as a final, I wanted to also mention this other point that I just remembered. When you talk about trivial, truths like 1 + 1 = 2, I think one of the reasons as well, one of the possible explanations about why belief in a creator, particularly in today's day and age, in a very secular day and age, is because of the implications of these ideas. When you have certain ideas which have implications on a person's life, irrespective of the evidence, people will have cognitive biases, or biases regards to the evidence, or cognitive dissonance regards to the evidence, because it's about changing beliefs, changing outlooks, and that's difficult for people. So it can be the case that these are very cogent, clear arguments, but what happens there are psychological factors, because of the acceptance that this is going to have an impact on a person's life, that they are going to be resistant, and they're going to try to bring arguments against it rather than just simply accept, the entailment of like a 1 + 1 = 2, because no impact in a person's life.
I'm a good example of that. Sorry, Jake, you go first.
Well, you can go if you want to make a quick comment, because I'm going to be a while.
My comment was simply just that I'm an example of that. So like when I went from being like hard atheist to more agnostic, there was a period of time where, like, speaking to my friends, I got to a point where I pretty much had like affirmed the different elements of the Shahada. So I did believe that there was a God. I did believe at some point that I backstepped from this later on. But it wasn't necessarily because of any argumentation or anything like that. It was just because of the context that it was in. But so I would affirm that the Quran was the word of God. Muhammad was the prophet of God. But I just didn't want to take my Shahada. And it was because I had all of these plans and these things that I wanted to do. And becoming a Muslim was going to be something that got in the way of that. And so at that time, I didn't take my Shahada. And then I just continued sort of living as I was living. And then I sort of stopped thinking about it. And so, the belief in all of these things just didn't interest me for a period of time. But I was there. I was like, I pretty much said or affirmed all of the points that would make you a Muslim. Specifically, or the only step that wasn't there was my testifying it properly and wanting to become a Muslim.
Yeah. So the first point I want to bring up, I'm going to read some Quran verses here, because if you're going to do an internal critique when people come on, they need to understand the Islamic theology and what our beliefs are. So in Quran chapter 49, verse 14, it says, the Bedouins say, we have believed. Say, you have not yet believed, but say yet instead, we have submitted, for faith has not yet entered into your hearts. And if you obey Allah and his messenger, he will not deprive you from your deeds of anything. Indeed, Allah is forgiving and merciful. So the point is, there were people coming to the Prophet ﷺ saying, oh, we believe. And what does he tell them? Say, no, you submit. And if you look in the throughout the Quran, when people came to the quote unquote belief in God, or however you want to frame it, they said, like Abraham said, Islamtu li Rabbil Alameen. I submit to myself to the Lord of the worlds. So what Allah or God from our perspective is concerned with is not just, recognition that he exists. He's concerned with submission to him and worshiping him properly. Second thing is that this whole point about, people are claiming they just need a sign and they just need this, they need that. Why don't all these things happen like these miracles in the past? No. The Quran says, and they swear by Allah, their strongest oaths, that if a sign came to them, if an ayah, a sign came to them, they would surely believe in it. Say, the signs, the ayat are only with Allah, and what will make you perceive that even if a sign came, they would not believe? So, no, the Quran is challenging this idea that even if they have a sign, and even if they know God exists, they don't care. They just want to go on doing what they're doing. And the Quran is saying that this is not necessarily true. So second thing is, we don't accept this narrative that, if I just had a sign, I would believe and I would become Muslim and all this. No, the Quran is rejecting that. Third thing is, in chapter 4, verse 153, it actually talks about people who already believed, had all of the signs, and then gives an example of what happened to them. It says, the people of the book, the Jews and the Christians, ask you to bring down to them a book from the heaven. But they had asked Moses of even greater than that and said, show us Allah outright. They wanted to see Allah directly. So the thunderbolt struck them for their wrongdoing. And who does that sound like? The modern day atheists. And then, even after they had all this, they took the calf after Moses left for a short time, and they even still had Aaron with them, Harun with them. After clear evidence had come to them, what? And we pardoned them, and we gave Moses a clear authority. So these were people who had clear signs from God, and were still, they were begging to see Allah, and they had all these clear signs. They had prophets with them, and they started worshiping a golden calf, right, after Moses was gone for a short time. So third point is that I want to dispel this notion that, again, we have clear, and again, this is our theology, so you can disagree with it, but this is coming from the Quran, that even people who had the signs, they went astray, even clear signs from Allah. Another point is these people on Judgment Day, right? Chapter 35, verse 37 says this, and they will cry out therein. This is talking about people in hell and after, the world ends. They will cry out therein, our Lord, remove us. We will do righteousness other than what we were doing. So these are people that are in hell that were doing bad things when they were on earth. And they're saying, just take us out, put us back on earth, and we'll do good deeds. What does he say? But did we not grant you life enough for whoever who would remember therein to remember? And the warner had come to you. So taste the punishment, for there is not for the wrongdoers any help. So he's saying, no, first of all, you guys already had enough of a chance while you were on earth. And if you're in hell, you deserve it, plain and simple. And there's another verse as well in the Quran that actually talks about these people asked to be sent back. And Allah says, even if we did send you back, you still wouldn't do what you're supposed to. And he calls them liars. So this is the Quranic position. Now, another verse, I just got a couple more here on Judgment Day, about this whole non-resistant, non-believer stuff. First of all, I'm skeptical of that notion, and I understand that you guys think that there are. Me and Sharif are a little bit more skeptical. You could call it wisdom, I don't know. But no, so these people that are supposedly non-resistant, non-believers, let's say for the sake of argument that they exist. I'm very skeptical of them, and if they do exist, I think they're in very small number. But let's say there's some of them. Well, what does Allah say? He says, so today, talking about Day of Judgment, no soul will be wronged at all, and you will not be recompensed except for what you used to do. So even if they did exist, right? The idea is those people who are quote unquote non-resistant, non-believers will not be punished in hell for eternity, because the Quran wouldn't do that. If they legitimately had justification for their disbelief, Allah will not send them to hell. They will not be wronged. Okay, so even if those people do exist, we don't have that problem because we don't believe that belief alone, or the lack of belief, quote unquote, is not sufficient just to send somebody to hell. If they actually had justification for it, as Imam Ghazali actually talks about, that if somebody was presented such a distorted version of Islam and they rejected it, well, then of course, because they're not even rejecting something that is the truth. Now, further on, I think what really this comes down to is whether or not there actually is sufficient reason to believe for most people. And we would argue, at least myself would argue, that yes, there is. And not only that, but that you are to serve and your creator and submit to his will. And I think we've tried to give arguments for that many times over. But what I think is going to happen is that these conversations, this argument is not sufficient on its own to really dispel the notion of a God. It's eventually going to go back to the actual arguments and evidence for God's existing. And on this, the Quran says, indeed, the worst of the living creatures in the sight of Allah are the deaf and dumb who do not use reason. Those who don't use their aql, those who don't use their reason. These kind of people who actually have the ability to know that God exists and to serve him appropriately, and they don't do it, of course, they're going to be in hell, and God is just for sending them to hell. Now, why does he say that these are the worst of living creatures? And on other verses, he actually compares them to cattle, but he says, no, you're actually worse than cattle. Why? Because a cow wasn't granted with the intellectual, rational faculties that man has in order to know his creator, right? And so they're not going to be blamed. You're not going to see cows in hell, that type of deal. You know what I mean? But these people who have been granted that ability, and what do? They're kuffar. Why? Part of the reason and the terminology is because they're ungrateful. They don't actually even use what God has given them in order to come to proper knowledge of him and submit to his will, because they just throw it in the bin. And I'm sorry to say, but my experience of dealing with most atheists and these people online is we have, I don't want to put a percentage on it, but the Quran uses most a lot, so I'll use the word most. Most people walking around, they're worse than cattle. They don't use their intellect, and they're just a bunch of philosophical zombies walking around. And I think that is the whole point. And then the final verse in the Quran, chapter 47, verse 24, it says, do they not ponder upon this Quran, or are there locks upon their hearts? So those are your two options. You don't ponder upon this Quran, your heart is going to be locked up. And so with that, I know it was a bit of a lecture, but I think we needed to include some Quranic verses and Islamic theology behind all this so people can understand the worldview and how this argument and these problems are severely lessened, if not completely evaporate, in virtue of the text that I just read. And I firmly believe in everything that I just read. So.
Jazakallah khair, Jake. I think Abdulrahman's probably a little bit busy because he's still got his newborn that he's still looking after, inshallah. So yeah, so no, alhamdulillah, I think that's I think what you're saying is really important, because obviously the Quran has answers to these particular types of questions that are being raised by atheists, or people who have a particular skepticism towards the Islamic belief or general belief in a creator. So I think it's really important to make this point, because this is the Islamic paradigm, because a lot of the arguments about divine hiddenness seems to be attacking the Christian paradigm, but when it attacks the Christian paradigm, makes the generalization about all theistic claims. And that's really, quite problematic, because then everybody starts to lump Islam into this. And I think, it just goes back to that singular point, which is, if they're saying that God is not providing them sufficient evidence, really the question then becomes, what is that evidence that theists, Muslims in particular, point to demonstrate the reason why we believe? Yeah, and the reason why we believe are the various arguments that we have, whether that's the rational arguments for the existence of the creator, or the Quranic arguments for the proof of the messengership, etc.
Yeah, and Sharif, that's my point, is that this is going to go back to the arguments for God's existence and the evidence anyway, because the whole sort of underlying principle of this divine hiddenness argument is already assuming that there isn't already good enough, sufficient, rational justification for the belief in God. That's part of the thing that's underpinning it. And of course, we reject it, and that's part of what we do here on Tap is we try to provide that evidence. So if I'm going to reject that and somebody brings up this argument, I'm saying it's immediately going to go to the evidence and arguments for God's existence anyway. And the battle is going to be had there as to whether or not there is sufficient evidence. And of course, we're going to argue that there is.
Yeah, I mean, when the argument is approached like that, like from the angle of, hey, why is God's existence not obvious? Hey, where is the evidence? As some of the people in the chat seem to be, alluding to, I think you're right. I mean, that just kind of begs the question, because we think that the evidence is there, and we think that it is obvious, and we think that he isn't hidden. So if it's approached in that sense, I mean, and from that angle, then yeah, it just totally begs the question, because the person you're speaking to doesn't agree with you that it isn't obvious that God exists. So are we done like covering a good enough part of the argument for us to start the calls, or do you guys want to?
I mean, I'm good to go. I'm fired up, baby.
Okay, so I don't know, Yusuf. Maybe.
Yeah, I'm cool to go. We'll just...
Yeah, we gotta put the
we gotta put out the link. Yeah, so
yeah, I've done that now.
Yeah. All right,
and I'm gonna pin it to the chat. So...
Okay. Yeah, and I just want to make an announcement, guys. We'll take Muslims on if we have to, but we want to give preference, obviously, to the atheists, because this is, sort of their problem, so to speak, and their argument. So we do want to front load any atheists or agnostics that think that this is a good argument and want to make a comment or question about this. We would like to speak to them first, preferably. Yep. And
also keep it on subject. Don't come on and start rambling about.
Yeah, we're not going
to. Something else we've already covered.
Yeah, we're not going to go on to some other complete nonsense that's irrelevant to the subject. And then, of course, theists are welcome. Christians, Muslims, if you want to join.
So I think we have our first guest. Seems to be a Christian, I think. Hey, Reincarnation Entertainment.
Hello,
hi, good to have you.
Hi, how are you?
We're good, thank you.
Very good.
Please just introduce yourself. Tell us whether you're a theist, atheist, and what you think of the argument.
I'm an atheist. I haven't actually. I've just come into the stream. So, are we only talking about the divine hiddenness, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Only divine hiddenness.
Okay.
And you missed everything we said for the past hour.
Pretty much. Yeah. Pretty much.
I mean, you could just give us your thoughts on the argument. I guess. I mean.
Okay.
Yeah, I've spoken to Yusuf before. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, I remember. I remember.
Yeah. Well, nice to see you again. Well, I've always argued that yes, God does remain hidden, and it's weird that if there is a God, why doesn't He sort of prove that He exists to all of us? Like, why doesn't He just do that? If He loves us or hates and loves some of us and wants us to do things, act a certain way, why doesn't He just come down and prove that He exists? So I have argued that, and that's basically the same as divine hiddenness, isn't it? I mean, that's what divine hiddenness really means.
Yeah.
So I've always argued that.
I mean, we did try to answer that for the past hour, so it is a bit frustrating that you missed all that.
I apologize.
We can give them a little bit of a recap. So, like, basically, we would say, in short, that He's not really that hidden. That there is plenty of evidence available to the sincere seeker. To establish belief in Him, the existence of contingent things in and of themselves, existence, the fact that there is something rather than nothing, yourself, your own being, your own experience of consciousness, all these type of things are things that make inference to the existence of a powerful being that created them all, and because of that, we would say that it's not that hidden. Even the Quran refers to creation as ayat, as signs for the existence of the Creator, and I think this is quite clear, as far as we're concerned. And so He's not that hidden. He's not that hidden. There are signs everywhere.
Yes. Yeah, wouldn't that just get us into arguments from the argument for contingency and the kalam, so you can actually present the evidence, though? That's what my point was, is that the divine hiddenness argument, in the way that you're saying it, really doesn't do anything, because then it just goes back to the whole argument and evidence discussion anyway, and to see whether or not there is. I agree. I agree.
Yeah,
I agree 100%. Yeah, it does just get us back. And for so long, I spent time avoiding that as an atheist. I've been an atheist for quite a while now, and I didn't really question the evidence too much. I always attacked the definition of God, like why, but I'm back now to questioning the evidence for God, like the argument for contingency and the Kalam are my two main ones that I'm going for. And I have my little argument against that, but they're probably not very good arguments. I mean, I'm taking a big step back from atheism, to be honest, because I've been talking to people like you, like EF. I've been on EF Dawa twice, and so.
Have you watched our other streams, Reincarnation?
I've watched your a bit on the miracles one. I thought that was quite interesting.
Okay,
and I've seen a few.
Because we did do a lot of streams on some of the arguments and evidence for God's existence, and I mean, we could go over a couple things with you right now just for a little bit, but I do recommend that you watch those streams where we went into them in some detail at greater length. So,
yes.
Because if you agree in principle with what I'm saying, that eventually, I mean, well, yeah, then it just goes down to whether or not there is sufficient evidence. And so that's going to push us back to the arguments anyway. Then it seems to me that this argument for divine hiddenness against God isn't sufficient to really either be even probabilistic against God's existence or show that he doesn't exist, because it's just going to beg the question and go back to whether or not there is any evidence anyway. So, I mean, I don't know how you guys want to pursue this any further.
Yeah, I was just going to ask him how do you understand the contingency or the cosmological arguments so far, and what weaknesses do you think they may have?
Well, for the argument from contingency, I don't really know the premises very well, but like I do with the Kalam, but I know it talks about necessary existence and contingent things, and I think maybe that's a false dichotomy, because there could be something which changes but still exists, something which can be dismantled, but it actually still exists within everything. So the original thing that created everything else may have changed. It became dismantled, and now it exists. It's imbued within everything. And that's what I'm sort of leaning towards believing, rather than necessary existence. But I may have got that wrong. And
like a Lego, and then Lego disassembles and then reassembles into another. But I think what it is, we need to understand what contingent is, because contingency doesn't have to imply beginning to creation, or beginning to the thing that exists. You can have theoretically a contingent thing that exists, but theoretically is eternal. We disagree with that, but I'm just saying for the sake of the argument. Contingency fundamentally is about how the existence of the thing itself and its properties are not explained by its own existence. Yeah. So, for example, I always give this example: the red triangle. Yeah, the property red is a contingent property. Yeah. So even if you had an eternal triangle, a triangle that's always existed, the fact that it's red as opposed to blue or green or yellow requires an explanation. That explanation is not contained in the existence of a triangle, like three sides. Yeah, three-sided triangle is the very definition, or the property of being three sides is in the very definition of being a triangle. So its property is explained by its existence of a triangle. Yeah, three sides. But the color red is not. Does that make sense?
I wasn't quite following it, so I've got quite poor concentration. But
no, but let me just repeat it really quickly again. So if you got a triangle, it has to be three sides, isn't it?
Yeah, it has to be three sides. Yeah.
Right. So that's a property. The property of a triangle is that it has three sides. Now, do we ask the question, why does a triangle have three sides? We just say it's true by definition, isn't it?
True by definition. Yeah.
Meaning the existence of the triangle explains the existence of why it has three sides. So we're not going to go outside of the existence of a triangle to say, why does it have three sides? Just true by definition. Now, if it was a red triangle, the property red of the triangle, is it explained by it being a triangle? Could you have a blue triangle?
Yes, you could. Yeah, it's not. That doesn't explain it being a triangle. Yeah.
Exactly. So now you're seeing this property that is not explained by the existence of the triangle. So you're going to ask the question, why is it red? You're not going to ask the question, why is it three-sided? But you are going to ask the question, why is it red? So now you're looking for an explanation outside of the triangle, other than a triangle. So even if the triangle existed for eternity, it would still be a contingent thing. Yeah.
Right.
So we would still need to have an explanation outside of this triangle to explain the triangle. So that's where necessary comes in. A necessary being is whose existence is contained within its own self, or its properties contained within its own existence, and it's eternal. Yeah. So therefore, that would be the basis by which fundamentally explains all contingent beings or contingent things that we see. So we need to have a necessary foundation. So that's why we can move from contingency to necessary. So contingency doesn't mean that it began to exist. Contingency means that it has properties that could have been another way than the way it is.
I've heard it described as possibly absent.
Yeah,
by,
possibly.
Museum.
That's the second way. So the first way is that it could be in a different way. Yeah, could be. Its properties could have been different than the properties that we see. That's one way of identifying contingency. The second way is possible existence, meaning it doesn't have to exist. It could exist, it could not exist. If we can identify one or both those things, we don't have to identify it could have existed or could not have existed. We can just identify the fact that it is a contingent property, meaning a property that could have been another way. If we can identify at least one of those aspects of a thing, then we're going to call it contingent. Yeah. And therefore, we're going to ask, what is it dependent upon?
But isn't there that third option that I'm talking about? That there's something which it's impossible for it not to exist, but also, so it's kind of, it has an element of necessary, but it also has an element of contingency because it can change. It can be dismantled, like you were talking about the Lego blocks being dismantled. So can there be a third option? That third option I'm talking about.
You're still admitting to a necessary being there anyway. I mean,
really?
You're still admitting to a necessary being there anyway, because it was.
I don't see that.
What's that?
I don't see that. Why is that necessary? If it can change, if it can be dismantled, Joshua Rasmussen says
because the original thing, the original state was necessary, and then even if it changes from there, it still was necessary originally.
There's still something that you're
originally
eternal.
Sorry.
There's still something that you're appealing to that's eternal.
Yes. Originally, it hadn't changed. But then at one stage, it changed. This is what I'm trying to get at to. That's why I believe in. So if that's necessary, then that's necessary. But it sounds.
So you're saying there has to be something that's eternal, yeah?
Yeah, it's going to be eternal, but it changed, and now it exists within everything. So it's still changed from one state to another state automatically.
Yeah, but the reason why
does it have a fundamental? Is it made up of something fundamental? So even if it changes,
I'm not sure you mean a fundamental. So it's made of something physical.
Sharif gave the example of the Lego. So you've got these Lego pieces, and you can take them apart and build them in different ways, and so there's this change taking place. But those Lego pieces are always there. That's the fundamental aspect of it. So the Lego is always present. The Lego that would be the fundamental substrate of reality. And so if you're saying that these Lego bricks can change, formation, and they can be taken apart and put back together again, the Lego bricks themselves would be considered necessary here because they've always existed. Whether or not they change form or shape, there's still a necessary existence of some sort, that being in that example, the Lego.
Right, but new Lego blocks can be sort of created from it. They can be like new Lego blocks coming up from it. I guess it's kind of sort of like that. But now I'm thinking in terms of like matter, and that's like, I don't know.
Yeah, should I?
So just really quickly, so if you're looking at contingency, what you're looking at is if this thing X, let's call it X, if this X which is eternal, and it could become something else, the thing that it becomes, does it become contingent? If it becomes contingent, then itself is not necessary. Yeah, it's a self-contradiction. Something cannot be necessary and contingent i.e., or something that cannot be eternal and then cause itself to be non-eternal at the same time, would be an impossible existence. Does that make sense?
I think sort of, yeah. I mean, as I say, I do think the thing that created everything else is eternal, but but yeah, I'm just going to repeat what I just said. It changed. I mean, I don't know what else what else to add with my point to that, but yeah, and I think
I don't know if you wanted.
If I move on to my actual argument, would be that so we live in a universe of change, and for an original thing to create something new, the original thing had to change. I mean, that's examples with basically everything there is in existence: energy changing into matter, or a tree, be a human intelligence changing into a table. The table doesn't just pop out the tree; it changes into.
So how about reincarnation?
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off. I just don't want us to go too long on this argument because it's not specifically the topic. But then how about we try to simplify it? So just think of like all of reality, the reality we exist in, with these random stuff around us, seemingly like arbitrarily limited, right? Like they have these properties, right? Something is green and not red, it's blue and not yellow, it's different shapes, different forms, different properties. Basically the world we live in, and we look at stuff and we investigate the way these things work, what caused them, what's the reason this thing is this way and not that, why is it limited in this way and not another. So just think of all of that reality, just put all of that reality in a box. All right, just a thought experiment, right? And do you think it has an explanation, the reality as a whole, like all of these stuff that are just changing and that have limitations, everything within this material world that we experience? Do you think that this reality as a whole has an explanation? So if you accept like the classical laws of logic, the law of excluded middle, either it has an explanation or it doesn't have an explanation, right? You don't really have to commit, like, to say 100% it has an explanation. But would you, looking at that box with everything in the box, right? Everything contingent in the box, would you lean towards explanation or no explanation?
Well, I would say space, time, energy, and matter was created from something else that was eternal. So it has an explanation for its existence.
Okay. So now that we're there and it has an explanation, do you think we can say anything about that explanation, like anything at all?
Yeah.
That it's eternal. You said it's eternal, right?
Yeah. It's immaterial, not made of space, time, energy, matter. I would say physical. I don't think it's made of nothing.
But it depends on what you mean by physical, right? Because like, are you going for like a broader physicalism, where physical things can be whatever physics discovers physical things to be? I mean, so it depends on what you mean by physical. Do you mean like the fundamental particles of this universe, or?
Well, it wouldn't, because a particle is like a bit of matter, isn't it? It's like a small bit of minute amount of matter.
So what do you mean by physical?
So by physical,
it has a substance. It has
a substance. Yeah, something real.
Yeah, fine. So there is something real. It's not spatial. It's not material, and it caused the world to exist. How far do you think you are from God in that? Like, would you just remain agnostic about? Like, do you think if we added a will to that, you'd have a God that would be far enough?
That's the thing I get into with my debate partner, is that I think it's an automatic creation. It happened automatically, not without will. Naturally.
Has it always been happening, or did it just happen at some point?
I think it happened without time. It happened outside of time, without will, and it happened once, probably.
Well, then how do you explain the beginning of the universe if it's 14 point whatever billion years old?
No, I think space, time, energy, and matter began to exist, but the universe itself, depending on what we mean by that, is essentially eternal.
Yeah, but he's asking you why it has a specific age. So why at that point? Why not another point? Like, why is it specifically that age if there was no will to choose what specific point it wanted to actualize it.
Why does it have to be? Sorry to interrupt. Why does it have to be will? Why couldn't it be an automatic, like a mechanical?
No, but if it was automatic, why is it only 14.8 billion years ago? I don't understand.
Why is it only 14? I've never.
Yeah, why not 13? Why not 13? Why not 22?
Well, yeah, I don't know why. I mean, I guess we could ask why, but that's a confusing question to me. Off the top of my head,
what our answer is that because God has a will and He created it at that moment. So I don't understand how you get, and this goes back to the argument for the will, how you get a temporal effect from an eternal cause.
How you get a temporary effect from well, God is an eternal cause, isn't He? He's eternal.
Yeah. So how do you get a temporal effect from an eternal cause without a will?
Well, as I say, all I can use is the word. This is the thing I get into with my debate partner. All I can use is the word automatic. That it just happened.
But I'm saying if it's automatic, why isn't the effect also eternal with the cause? I don't understand.
Sorry, why isn't the effect eternal
with the cause? If the cause is eternal and the cause is automatic, then it would automatically produce the effect, and therefore the effect would also be eternal alongside the cause.
I don't see why it would have to be eternal.
Reincarnation. If A is sufficient for B, so A being the necessary entity and B being the contingent world, if A is sufficient for B, then whenever there's A, there's B. So is A sufficient for B? Is the necessary being sufficient, or the necessary entity sufficient for causing the contingent world?
It has to be. You said it's automatic.
Yeah. So if it's sufficient, then whenever there's A, there's B. So why isn't that the case with your necessary being?
Well, what we're talking. Well, yeah. What we're talking about. Is it how do you pronounce that word? Antecedent. This is antecedent properties, like something that has to occur. That something that logically exists before the other thing. So B has to follow A.
Yeah,
but my whole thing is you're saying it's automatic. If something is automatic, it just happens. That's it. It doesn't. Yeah, but it's not like in a certain state for however long, and then all of a sudden it just happens out of nowhere. I mean, it's
reincarnation. So go on, reincarnation.
Yes, sorry. Sorry, it just because it happens automatically. It only had the power to do it once.
Then it wasn't sufficient to produce the effect prior to it then. So that means there had to be some type of change that allowed it to then be sufficient to produce the effect. So it wasn't always sufficient to produce the effect.
And then you'll have to explain. So if you want to say that change itself is mechanistic, you'll have to explain how it took an eternity for that change, for that necessary change to occur. I mean,
I think when you say eternity, it's like that's an eternity of time. I mean, well, I can also ask the question. Couldn't I just ask the question? How did God create with will? I mean, you would say using will, but
He willed it.
Well,
let me ask this, reincarnation, so we can cut to the chase. Why do you think it doesn't have a will, or are you just agnostic about it?
No. Why doesn't it have a will?
Why is it your? Why do you think it does not have a will?
Well, I don't think it has intelligence, but
let's stick with will, because intelligence complicates things. Let's stick with will, like, because we know what a will is, right? Like I willed to come on this call, right? I had a will and I decided. So why do you think that this necessary entity does not have a will?
Well, I don't believe in free will, but why doesn't it have a will? I've never been asked that question. That's actually a really good question before. I've never really considered like why it doesn't have a will. I just always argued for automatic creation. Why doesn't it have a will?
Can I help?
I just feel like asking why does it have a will? Sorry, I can't think of it.
So let me help you out. Maybe you could argue that it's simpler. It's a simpler explanation.
Yes, I have argued that before in the past. That it's simpler.
Okay. But is it a simpler explanation that I don't have a will? Because you know in philosophy, you know the problem of other minds, right?
No. I don't know much about philosophy.
It's okay. That's fine. So the problem of other minds is basically, how do you know minds other than your own exist? Basically, you have access to your first-person subjective experience. You have access to your experience. but you don't have access to anyone else's experience. It could be the case. I mean, it's conceivable. Might be ridiculous to think about, but it's conceivable that, you know, the humans around you are just robots or zombies or figments of your imagination. Why do you attribute will to things, or minds to things other than yourself? Now, you can think about that for a bit, but just to tell you where I'm going with this is that I think the most fundamental, at the core, you know, level of our reasoning, it's not just automatic. You know, we infer it, obviously not consciously, but we infer it from the behavior of things. If I look at a rock tumbling down a mountain or a hill, right? How do I know it's not moving itself? It doesn't have a will, right? It's just reacting to its physical surroundings. Well, because it seems to be behaving in a way that's just deterministic. It's just cause effect. You throw, it moves. The wind blows it, it moves, you know? It reacts to gravity in that way. There's no resistance that's not a direct result of its physical surroundings. So objects around us, they only react to their physical surroundings, and we don't see them behaving in a way that's not predictable. Like my laptop is not going to suddenly get up and go get a cup of tea, right? So we know that they behave in a way that's bound by their physical constraints. But when I look at a cat, so I have 2 cats, right? So when I look at my cat and suddenly the cat decides to jump on the couch, well, I can't explain that from anything that happened around the cat. It looks like the cat decided to do that on its own, right? It's not like something pushed it up or kicked it up, right? So I think at the very basic level, we look at the world around us and most things are just, you know, objects that react to their physical stimuli. But then there are a few things that seem to be behaving in a non-deterministic manner, in a manner that's not predictable, in a manner that seems like, okay, this person is moving his own self, right? Now that's the core. That's I think that's the foundation of how we can come to know that things have wills and minds. And you said you don't believe in free will. I might understand why, because we have these physical surroundings that might be influencing us to do things. But you believe in a necessary foundation that doesn't. So maybe you could make that argument for us, although I wouldn't agree with it. I think we do have free will. But for the necessary foundation, what physical stimuli could it have to move it? I mean, it's at the very bottom. It's at the core. It's at the beginning of the causal chain. There is nothing else that influences it. So the idea here is that I think if I were to witness this necessary entity just causelessly, as in without an antecedent cause that precedes it, doing things like creating the universe, I would have more reason to believe that this necessary entity has a mind or a will than I do believe that you or my wife has a mind or a will, right? Might get in trouble for that, but you get what I'm saying. You get what I'm saying?
I think vaguely. Yeah, I'm not good at following what people say. I need to practice that.
So let me put it this way: people move themselves. It looks like the difference between you and a rock is that you are moving yourself. There's nothing outside of you pushing you to move, and there is definitely a lot of stuff outside of a rock pushing it to move, right?
So reincarnation, what Abdul's saying, if you saw a rock on a flat piece of surface and it's moving, and there's no way we can explain any external cause for its movement, what are you going to think about that rock?
There's what you can't explain an external cause that moved the rock.
No, there is no explanation.
What you think there was, though?
Let's say there wasn't. Let's say you've investigated it. Let's say you see these little legs walking around in the rock. What are you going to say about it?
So if there were little legs walking around,
then
it was walking itself. You would say you use the sentence it was walking itself.
Right. So you're going to infer some sort of will, isn't it? intentionality, agency.
Well, that comes from within the brain, wouldn't it? It would come from within the brain. I was saying that leads us into the.
Yeah, it doesn't matter about the brain because I don't need to see your brain in order to know you have will. Yeah, because I can infer the fact that because you have agency, you're like that rock on a flat piece of surface walking around. You're doing things that cannot be explained directly through physical laws, antecedent physical laws causing you to do what you're doing. Yeah, I can infer a will. So what Abdul is saying here, he's saying that when you see something that acts non-deterministically, you understand that it has a will, it has agency, the power to do things. Yeah? So he's saying because we come to a conclusion that there's a necessary being, the necessary being is doing things according to its own internal self. By definition, that would be called will, or at the very least, agency. It's not doing something that's compelled by something other than itself.
Yeah, that sort of brings me back to the brain again, because it's like, I think in the brain, everything's just going on automatically, like clockwork, sort of mechanically, automatically.
Yeah, but we can grant you that. Remember what I said? I said we can grant you the brain because you have physical stuff around us that maybe you can appeal to. We don't agree with it, but for the sake of this argument, I can grant that to you. You're going to say we seem to be free, but there's this stuff in the brain that explains it, and we're actually not. Fine, okay.
We're not
but
free.
Then but we're not free. But in the case of the necessary foundation of reality, I mean, are you gonna appeal to something mechanistic? Because there's gonna be a limit. So if it's a mechanistic process that initiates creation, then that mechanistic process is internal to this necessary being, right? Because there's nothing outside of it that compels it to react. It's just the necessary foundation, right? So if it's mechanistic from within it, well, then still you're gonna have a causal chain, and it's gonna reach a point where there's an edge there. It's not gonna go like ad infinitum all the way backwards. Turtles all the way down. Then and you're not gonna get any action, right? But then so since there's going to be an edge, even if you want to appeal to something mechanistic, within that necessary foundation, there is going to be something there that's behaving without anything causing it to behave, without anything as in external to the thing itself causing it to behave. And you're going to have to accept that. Otherwise, there is something external. So what I'm saying is, you believe I have a mind, at least, or a will. So you can put free will aside. Just think of mind. You believe I have a mind because I behave in these ways that are non-deterministic. I'm not just pushed around by my physical surroundings. And I'm saying you have more reason to believe that the necessary foundation, which necessarily couldn't be pushed around by physical surroundings because it has none, you have more reason to believe that has a mind than you do believe that I have a mind. That's the gist of the argument. That's how I think about this, just generally speaking.
Does that make sense, Reincarnation, or are you?
It just does a little bit. Yeah, it does a little bit. I think I have to go away and think about it some more.
Can I give you a third argument to think about?
Go ahead.
So when we talked about the red triangle, and we said the redness is a possible property of a triangle. Yeah, it's not a necessary property. And we're saying, well, you've got all these possibilities of colors that the triangle could have. Because it has one possibility out of a number of possibilities, what are you going to infer about the cause for the triangle? So we said there has to be a cause to explain why this triangle is red.
It's red,
now,
yeah.
There's all these options. There's all these options of what it could have been, but one was selected. So what can we say about that cause that selected one possible option over a number?
It was selected somehow. Something. I would want to say something selected it. Or
and you'd probably say intentionality.
Well, in the case of a triangle, a human would have colored it red.
Yeah. So there's intentionality. What I'm saying is this: I'm laying the foundation. The foundation is this: is that when you've got a number of possibilities and one possibility is selected, it requires some sort of intentionality to select one out of a number of possibilities. Now you could say, yeah, but maybe there's a machine. Maybe there's a machine that selects it. But then even that machine that selects it from a code, and then you still have possible codes, and one of them has to be actualized out of a number of possibilities.
So isn't that what you call the anthropomorphic fallacy?
Anthropic.
Anthropic.
It's different. It's different to the anthropic principle. Yeah, it's similar to the point, but it's not the same thing. All I'm saying is this: is that you've got this eternal X. Yeah, so it's eternal X. You're just going to call it unknown for the time being, but we know it's eternal. We know it's necessary. Yeah. And we're just trying to see, well, is this eternal X? Can we say anything else about the properties? We know this eternal X selected properties out of a number of possibilities. So it made a selection process.
But in the case of the universe, maybe this sort of space-time, energy, matter, maybe there was only one possibility that it could always have been.
But then you're saying that everything is necessary. That's the problem, is it collapses and makes everything necessary. And we know that not everything is necessary because he made the distinction between the triangle and the color of the triangle. And that shows that not everything is necessary. Therefore, you wouldn't be able to say that.
But
it would make more sense, reincarnation, would it not? Yeah. To say, if you got a necessary X that actualized one out of a number of possibilities, the ability to do that, and consistently so, would require some sort of intentionality, an intention to do that. An intention implies will. That would make more rational sense. To say it's necessary that the universe had to be the way it is, you have to provide an argument to demonstrate why it is necessary. Yeah. For example, if I was to turn around and I was to say a triangle is 3 sides, then I have an argument to demonstrate why a triangle has to be 3 sides, or why bachelors are unmarried. I have an argument, to demonstrate why that's necessarily the case. But there's nothing necessary in the universe. It's a contingent thing. Yeah, the Planck's constant could have been another figure than the figure that it is at the moment, which is a universal constant of the universe. So you've got possibilities, you've got all these range of possibilities, and then you've got something X that's eternal that selects one out of a number of possibilities. The best explanation would be will, intention.
Okay, but my mind just keeps wandering.
It's not compelled because the necessary being can't be compelled, can it?
It can't be compelled to do something.
Yeah, because compelled implies something external is causing it to do something.
Yeah, there's nothing external to the original cause.
Exactly.
Everything else. Yeah,
so it's internal.
It's internal.
So what's the opposite of compulsion?
What's the opposite of compulsion? To not be compelled to do something.
Well, it's free will, isn't it?
To be free.
To be free, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if this necessary being is not compelled, you said it's not compelled because there's nothing external to it to compel it. The opposite of that would be free will.
Free will. Yeah. I don't know really where to go with that because I just haven't thought about it enough. I know I haven't thought about it enough. I've only been thinking about this specific counter to the argument for contingency for a few weeks now.
So reincarnation, you're given 4 arguments here for a will.
Right.
The first argument is contingent things began to exist. Yeah, so they had a beginning. Whereas the necessary being is eternal. The necessary cause is eternal. If you have an eternal cause, you have an eternal effect, if there's no choice. But you don't have that. You have an eternal cause, but you have an effect that is not eternal. It begins. Yeah. So the best explanation in that situation would be somebody intended to cause at this moment. The second argument that Abdul gave, was an argument to say that when you identify something is not compelled externally, to do an act, you identify that it is internal from the will. Like the rock rolling down the hill compared to a rock running around on a flat piece of surface. You're going to think it's alive. It has a will. And the third argument is when you've got a number of possibilities and one is selected, to do the ability to select or actualize one out of a number of possibilities requires a will. And the third one was the fact that this thing, this necessary being, is not compelled, which we agree, because there's nothing external to compel it. So the opposite of compulsion would be free will. So it makes most sense. Makes most sense. If we come to the conclusion that there's a necessary being, the best explanation, the logical entailment, if you want to use that word as well, makes the fact that this necessary being has a will. Decided to create. And there's no arguments to say why we would say it compelled. In fact, the idea of a necessary being compelled automatically to create seems to contradict the whole notion of what a necessary being is.
Yeah, you can make a final comment, but I think we're gonna have to move on because most of this has been on contingency argument, and we do want to get to some people who are waiting that might have comments on the divine hidden.
But Reincarnation come back on later on, but have a think about these points.
Check out our other streams.
Okay.
We had a stream on this. We had a stream about from necessary being to God. Which was a second stage of the contingency argument.
It's episode 6 of
Podcast. I think it's the most interesting argument. I'll just end with saying for the existence of God, that and the Kalam and the fine-tuning argument, and it's something I have to study a lot more and think about a lot more before I can draw any conclusions. But I do feel my atheism being pushed back a little bit. I'll admit that it's being pushed back a little bit from my agnostic atheism. From just like I'm not almost certain anymore that there's no God. I'm like probably no God, but You've definitely shown me a thing or two that I need to think about, and I'll come back on the stream sometime.
And Reincarnation, wouldn't you want to be wrong as well of your atheism?
What you mean, Pascal's wager?
Whatever it is, wouldn't you want this idea that there is meaning, there is purpose?
Well, I don't like the idea of hell.
Morality.
I don't like the idea of hell. I fear death, so I don't.
There is eternal paradise.
It's not only hell, it is.
There is the ability to have absolute bliss. Wouldn't you want to have that? The idea of that there's more meaning than just this cosmic nihilism, that we're just accidents, and that we're just robots thinking we have the illusion of consciousness and free will. It seems to me, even if I put myself in an atheist's shoes, I'd want to be wrong. And then that has these compelling arguments. What's that?
No, because the idea of hell is so horrible to me that I think almost for certain nothing bad happens after you die, but it could be something bad for all of us. And that makes me fear death.
But we believe God is merciful, and that anybody who's sincere, then Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, the Creator, He will show mercy to that person.
Yeah, the doors to repentance are always open.
Yeah, but the fact that there's a hell at all is really just like I think that's like almost psychological terrorism. That there's like the idea of hell that someone's pushing on you.
Well, we talked about that on the other stream, Problem of Evil. So I mean, you can check that out. But we're gonna have to move on.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot. It was good talking to you.
Pleasure talking to you.
Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Very much. Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye.
Okay, take care. Before you bring somebody else on, because we're going to go to Karlos next. He was waiting in and out the longest. I just want to address one comment here. When Sharif and I were talking about contingency, our good friend, Mr. Cease to Know, nonsense. You have no grounds to claim what is actually contingent and what isn't.
Wow.
So I actually invited him on. I said, I would like you to make that comment. Please make that comment on video so we can capture atheists who say that we can't actually You know what he would probably do? Well, you know what? What about this pen? Is it necessary or contingent? Yeah, we would get, it's irrelevant. I mean, come on, dude. If you can't tell the difference between 1 + 1 = 2 in my pen, then sorry, enjoy your atheism, my friend.
I'm looking for the pen emoji now.
Yeah, no,
Karlos,
it's already up there. Yeah. How do Karlos?
Hello.
Hello. How you doing?
Hey,
man?
Karlos. It's been a while.
Hi. Yeah. Good evening, guys. How you doing? Yeah. Is my audio okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little
We're good.
crackly,
Yes.
but it's not too bad.
Okay. Yeah. So for some reason, my internet's really rubbish. I keep dropping out, so I may drop out. But just persevere, see how we go. So yeah, it was an interesting conversation what we was having before. I know we've talked about it before. I don't want to go off topic, so I'll just stick to the topic of the discussion today about divine hiddenness, because this is probably, for me, I know there's atheists for all kinds of reasons. For me, this is probably one of the biggest reasons why I'm an atheist, because I used to be religious when I was younger, and I didn't get anything from God as much as I tried to speak to God, as I prayed to God, as much as I believed in God genuinely growing up.
Oh, he cut out. Yeah, he's got internet problems, because I noticed even when he was back waiting, he kept going in and out. So
we'll give him a second because it didn't take too long to jump back on. What Karlos needs, here he is back again. Karlos, what you need is an Ethernet cable. That's what you need.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, I don't know if this is going to work out.
You need to invest in an Ethernet cable.
Right.
And if you don't have a laptop or a computer, you can get an extension for your phone. So you can plug your phone into the Ethernet.
Right.
And then you won't have these problems. Usually it's just because of Wi-Fi.
Okay. Well, I'll try and make my point quickly as I can. So basically, talk about what kind of evidence we would want to know that God actually does exist. I mean, according to yourselves, I mean, he has already given some sort of evidence of his existence through revelation and through miracles and things like that, which maybe you consider is sufficient to gauge that he does actually exist. But obviously, when I ask people about that, they say that it's for the people of the time. It's not something that would necessarily happen now. And my question would be, what is so different about the people of that time versus now? I mean, why would God reveal himself then and not reveal himself now? That's my major question.
Are you talking about, why are there no miracles today? Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, normally the answer that is given is that whenever something happened in the past, it was done for the people of that time, or revelation was for the people of that time. What's
but it was
different
never
about
the norm.
What's different about their time versus our time?
Yeah, but it was never the norm for human beings to see miracles. It was only came about with regards to certain messengers that came to demonstrate the proof of their messengership. Yeah, but this is slightly different to the topic about belief in a creator, because a belief in a creator is not dependent upon seeing a miracle. If for example, look, if I'm an atheist and I see a miracle, quote unquote miracle, I'm gonna look at an event through my metaphysical commitments, and my metaphysical commitments will say this isn't a miracle. This is maybe some sort of trickery. This is some sort of materialistic explanation that we don't have an explanation for, but it has a materialistic foundation to it, because I'm going to view it from that materialistic paradigm. So a miracle in and of itself is not going to be sufficient until you've established fundamentally that there is a non-materialistic explanation to events that can occur and potentially does occur, or certainly does occur with regards to the existence of the universe. But you have to come to that conclusion first. Do you not think, Karlos?
Yeah, so you're saying that those miracles and revelations on their own wouldn't be sufficient, is what you're saying?
I'm saying that for a person who's an atheist, he might look at those things. He might question, maybe it might be sufficient for him. I'm not going to necessarily say it's not, but I'm just going to say for a lot of people, they would look at, or not a lot of people, but for some people who are atheists, they will look at certain events through their own paradigm, through their own metaphysical commitments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, for example, let's take the example of the Quran. Yeah. So the Muslims, and I think we've had this discussion before. For the Muslims, we believe that's quite a self-evident miracle. Yeah. But it requires investigation. Yeah. So it's not just something that is 1 + 1 = 2. You're going to have to study it. So, for example, you'd have to study its contents. You'd have to study maybe the style of language that it's written in terms of, I'm not saying you have to study Arabic, but you'd have to look at, its claim to being inimitable in its production. You'd have to look at the experts of the Arabic language, what they've said about it, maybe the counters to that. And you'd have to look at it, investigate all of these things in order to realize that the Quran is beyond human productive capacity. However, if you're going to be a person who is committed to a materialistic explanation or a materialistic paradigm for events, you're going to look at the Quran, and if you can't explain something, you're just going to be committed to your materialistic explanation. So you need to break that first. Accept that there can be a non-materialistic explanation to the universe, and for miracles it would be a non-naturalistic event, or an event that occurs that cannot be explained by the known laws of the universe.
Yeah, and I think any one miracle on its own would not suffice as evidence for God, but it would be good evidence for God. It's like evolution. Is all the evidence is for evolution. Just finding a fossil would not give you the conclusion that evolution is true, even though the evidence around the fossil is conclusive. So, I definitely wouldn't say that a miracle is sufficient. I'm not saying that it would be sufficient, but we don't even see any evidence of those. And these are the supposed evidences of God actually demonstrating his existence.
So like I said, one thing would be that we believe that God demonstrates his existence through contingent realities. These are signs for the existence of God.
Okay.
You agree, isn't it? You and I agree that there is a necessary being.
We do.
Yeah. You differ upon whether the necessary being logically entails, or through best explanation, that it has a will.
Yeah, I would contest that, yeah.
Yeah. So you're under a burden of proof to demonstrate why you think it doesn't have a will, and I'm under a burden of proof why I think it does have a will.
I'm open to the arguments. I'm open-minded to anything, but I wouldn't say that I have a burden of proof. But
why don't you have a burden of proof?
Well, I'm not making a claim that it's.
But you are making a claim.
Sorry, I'm not.
Go, Karlos.
Oh no! He's dropped out.
Hopefully he'll come back.
Look what you did. You told him to leave and then he left.
I know, it's such a bully, Sharif.
Unbelievable, man.
You big meanie pants.
We're going to have a meeting after this episode, guys.
I know.
Oh, get kicked off.
You should jump back on. It doesn't take too long usually. There we go.
Yeah.
And he's back. Sorry about that. I know Sharif gets a bit pushy sometimes.
Sorry. I'm back.
You didn't rage quit, did you, Karlos?
No, not yet. I'm not yet.
Go on.
But yeah, I'm not saying it's a logical impossibility.
Yeah, but you are inclined to the fact that it's not has a will. It doesn't have a will.
Yeah, I'm saying that there's also a possibility that it could just be a natural event. Yeah.
So you're just agnostic now.
Pretty much, yeah. I'd say so.
Yeah,
I mean,
so you're 50-50.
Well, I don't know about 50-50. I mean, if there's two choices, then I suppose it is a 50-50. But
yeah. So, did you listen to the discussion we had with the previous guest?
He left again, but notice what's happening. It's going back into the evidence for God. I mean, that's all it does. It's like
has to.
Yeah, but that's kind of my point, because maybe when Karlos comes back, I'd like to ask him if he agrees with the three premise argument that Schellenberg's. Yeah.
Sorry, guys. I'm probably have to give up on this. Sorry, I don't know what happened.
Cable. Get yourself an Ethernet cable.
I've never had this problem before.
I'll stand next to your router. Are you on the Wi-Fi or are you on 4G?
I'm on the Wi-Fi. Yeah.
On the Wi-Fi.
So, Karlos,
next to
I think
your
Jake
router?
was going to ask you a question, but I was also going to
Go
say
for
to you, did you hear the points that we were discussing with the previous caller, Reincarnation?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
So we gave 4 arguments for a will. Have you got one argument for non-will?
I think what we have to say is that our understanding of time.
And it's time for you to go.
I think we might
every time he leaves. Every time he leaves, it's pretty funny. Yeah, let's go to Brother Zakaria for a second here. Salam.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Salam alaikum. It's been so long, brother.
Salam. How are you? It's been a long time since we've talked. So, I'm just...
We're all on
we
Clubhouse
missed you
now.
a lot, Zach.
Yeah, likewise. MashaAllah. Keep up the good work. May Allah bless you, increase you in knowledge, rank, humility, everything else.
I mean,
are you the brother that's always talking about my accent?
I'm not talking about your accent now, but
you're not. But usually, there's always something about dialect or accent.
I don't want to derail the conversation at all. But I have noticed that Sharif has made a concerted effort not to say, "Isn't it?"
Isn't it? Yeah. and whatnot.
Yeah, and whatnot.
And whatnot.
Yeah. So, mashallah. Good to see you all. It's past midnight where I'm at, so I'm not gonna, and I don't want to keep you from talking with other people. So I'm just gonna log off, and inshallah, see you all later.
All right, salam, brother. Good seeing you.
See you, inshallah. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.
You too. Alaikum salam.
I wanted to say something about Karlos's point about there he is. So I guess you guys continue first. I'll bring this point up later.
Yeah, I mean, Karlos, I just wanted to ask the point about what you think of the argument. So the hiddenness argument, it says premise 1, if God exists, then there are no non-resistant non-believers. What do you think of that premise? Karlos? Are you resisting?
It wasn't me. It wasn't me.
He's resisting.
He's not muted. Let me get rid of the Sharif is mean comment just so we can see.
Yeah, we don't need to display the obvious. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Come on, Karlos.
Karlos, what if I roll my R's when I say your name? Karlos.
Yeah, he's not here.
There was a bit of an interference though, like there was some noise. There's no one in the back either, so it's not. Like
I wanted to try to get him to interact with the argument to see if he agrees with premise 1. If God exists, then there are no non-resistant non-believers.
Karlos, nick someone else's phone, maybe.
Yeah.
But anyway. What's interesting is that this is seen as one of the key arguments for atheism, the divine hiddenness argument. And it's always been the case for me is that when people brought up the divine hiddenness argument, I always thought, what a rubbish argument. I've never liked this argument.
The problem of evil has much more force, I think.
I don't think this argument works because it just look what's happening. It just goes back to the whole discussion about the arguments for God.
Yeah, just a point on the miracles because it's related to the whole non-resistant non-believers thing. So why don't we have miracles right now? And Sharif brought this point up earlier that people in the past, they witnessed miracles and still disbelieved. Actually, most of them did. Now the thing is, so what kind of miracles are you looking for? Like what level? Like maybe 1 event in your life, 2, or do you want scientific certainty, like repeatability and testability, in the sense that I don't know. I think there's an atheist YouTuber, I forgot which one it was, who says that a good evidence for God would be that whenever he prays for something, it happens. Like he prays for $1 million. right there, right?
Like a genie.
Yeah.
Genie.
Yeah, exactly. And the
Grant me
problem is, so
wishes.
this again goes back to the discussion about the belief and coercive belief, because in a sense, if that is the case, then it couldn't be the case for any of our acts to be morally significant. If you're looking right at God, and you're looking right at heaven and hell, to the extent that whenever you pray for $1 million, it's there. So then how is anything you do morally significant? How is anything you do, anything other than just trying to avoid hell and get the heaven that you can see and avoid the hell that you are certain of? So it just, again, it depends on what kind of signs you're looking for, because we would say miracles still do exist, but it just depends on what you're looking for.
Yeah, I think there's a nice quote from one of the leaders of the Quraysh, who was an obstinate enemy to Islam and to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because he was also a well-known poet. He, understood Arabic language at a very high level, and when he heard the Quran, he basically testified that it's beyond human productive capacity, certainly beyond the productive capacity of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he said, after hearing some verses of Quran, he said, "By God, there is not a man amongst you who is better versed in poetry than me, or has more knowledge of prose, or ancient, or something called an ancient Arabic poem with rigid tripartite structure than me. Yet in the Quran there is sweetness and beauty, and in it there is grace and elegance. And at its highest it is fresh and leafy, and at its lowest it is copious and abundant. Verily it is the highest, and nothing is higher than it." So what's really interesting about this particular quote is that he remained a non-Muslim. So he recognized the inimitable nature of the Quran and what we believe as Muslims as a miracle and mu'jiza, which we can test today. But he didn't want to submit. And that's the key issue. And I think this goes back to what Jake was saying about, it's not just about acknowledging God exists or acknowledging the miracle, particular miracle. It's about willing to submit to the will of God. I think we got another caller, though.
Why so
religious?
Hello, how y'all doing?
I do. What do you go by sometimes?
His name is Ray.
Is it Ray?
It's not Ray. That's what Hamza makes me go under. He doesn't like my name going.
Wow,
so
even the baby didn't like us calling you Ray.
Okay, funny. All right, so I really don't use as an atheist this argument of hiddenness. Y'all
Why not? You don't like it?
I think it's kind of irrelevant.
Wait, hold on a second, sir. It's irrelevant. Okay, go ahead.
No, I mean, it's irrelevant to think of a God as either being able to be seen or hidden. Now, I do think that it's kind of strange that a God would pick and choose who they want to be seen by or speak to, but that in the theory of God, I guess it makes sense that they could be peculiar in who they want to speak to.
So Ray, why do you think some atheists are use this argument, and why are they so disturbed by this whole thing? Why do you think that is?
I'd say atheists use the argument because they think that it's relevant. It's relevant to themselves. Like, that's the thing, is it's not an argument that I think is relevant to all people. That's the reason I say it's irrelevant, because it's an argument that people who believe don't need to see proof, and even people who disbelieve don't have to not see God to disbelieve in it, if that makes sense to you.
Okay. All right. So
Do you get what I mean by I said that?
Yeah, I don't think that, first of all, I don't think God is a physical object, so I don't think he can be seen in this life in that way. And well,
that kind of goes against the teachings of actual, traditional Sunni Islam, or at least as far as the Sahaba went, because the original beliefs is not that you can imagine like God looks like a human, because it's outside of human imagination even of what God looks like, but God does have literal body parts that Muslims are told to believe in.
No,
Not
he
only that,
doesn't.
you have the
No,
you
he
have the
doesn't.
hadith, you have the hadith where Muhammad sees Allah's veil. So if
Ray,
Allah has a veil
Ray,
covering
you gotta
something,
stop it, buddy. You're misrepresenting it.
Second of all, if you're gonna make claims, just provide evidence. So give us, evidence.
Abdul, you gotta pull your mic down.
Mike.
So I'm saying, first of all, this is off topic. Second of all, if you're gonna make claims, please provide evidence. Otherwise, it's off topic, and you're not providing evidence.
We don't believe God has body parts, Ray. Sorry, even
so
people
when
who
God says He has a shin, you think
it's not a body part.
Yeah. So what's the verse? What's the verse? No, shin. Stick to the shin. What's the verse?
Oh my gosh, dude! This is the verse is there. So why are you asking?
Ray, it's not a body part.
I know in Arabic, and there are interpretations. You're gonna have to ask us which position we take, because in the Arabic language, that expression is used when there is something like in a situation where it's something very serious is happening, something concerning, like in battle and stuff like that. And so it's gonna depend. You're not going to be able just to refer to one verse, take a specific literal interpretation of it, which some Muslims do hold. I'm not denying
even that, Abdul, they don't say it's a body part.
Yeah, exactly. Even them, they don't say it's a body part. They don't say it's physical.
Nobody
says God is physical. No Muslim says God has body parts. But I'm saying, even if they do, for you to come here and say that Islam says this, as if we're going to have to be bound by the interpretation you're focusing on.
The Sahaba did not believe in body parts.
Provide evidence.
They did not believe in literal physical body parts.
Okay. No Sahabi believed that God had body parts. So maybe next time you can come. I mean, we do this every 2 weeks. Next time, just do a bit of homework, come with a bit of references, so you can, whatever you say, you can back up with evidence, because we just don't accept it. So yeah. So maybe next time provide references, and also we're off topic. So I think, do you have anything to say on? He
already did. He doesn't like the argument. He doesn't think it's a good argument. He already commented on the argument.
Perfect. Why is he? Why so religious? Why is he an atheist? Why are you an atheist?
Ray?
Well, I mean, because
you're breaking up, Ray. You're breaking up, buddy. You're breaking up.
Hold on. Okay.
You got to start over.
Why are you an atheist?
You got to start over, buddy. We couldn't hear you.
I always feel like when Muslims ask me this question, it's kind of redundant, in the sense that in your belief system, Allah's already covered why I don't believe.
I'm asking you.
Asking me is
So why are you?
Asking me is either Allah's words are sufficient for you, or you need me to explain.
I want you to explain.
So
I want you to tell me
Ray,
why you don't believe.
Ray, why do you got to be like this, buddy? We're just asking you a question, man.
You're thinking. You're thinking you're on Hamza's den.
Of why?
But that's not your answer, because you don't believe in the Quran. So give us your answer.
No, I'm giving you an answer of why I think it's a redundant question, but I will answer your question.
Irrelevant. Is it an irrelevant question?
I don't.
Is it an irrelevant question?
It's like this, right? I don't have to disprove God exists.
Okay.
I just have to disprove your God exists by the words that you attribute to your God.
So do you?
You're still not answering the question. Why are you an atheist? Why don't you believe in any God?
There is. So, as far as theism, every words that I have read that are attributed to a deity have some form of inaccuracy that does not actually relate to universal.
Yeah, but that
truths,
wouldn't
I'll
prove
say.
that there's not a God.
And
Let's say all
then-
the scriptures are wrong. There could still be a God.
Now let me finish. So that's what I'm saying. I'm breaking it down from theism to deist. Now, after that would be the concept of like, you could have like a deist / pantheist belief. But to me, even a deist belief doesn't make, I don't want to say that it doesn't make sense. It's just that, for one, there's no evidence to support that there has to be a creator of the universe, let's say. That there is the belief system that there has to be a creator, but belief systems are not necessarily truth.
So,
and
Ray,
until there is,
why do you believe? What would you consider evidence?
Honestly, I wouldn't know until it's presented to me, probably.
Well, that's part of the problem.
But surely,
So,
Well, no,
are
you say that's-
you
but that-
an
no, but that's
agnostic? Are you an agnostic, Ray?
Let
Like,
me just answer what you said. Part of the problem is, well, if you take that stance, that's like saying part of the problem with lightning always being attributed to Zeus for so long is because they did not know what lightning was and how it actually came into formation.
What?
Scientifically. But then once we learned about it, we learned how it occurs. It takes away the what I need as sufficient evidence, because it actually proves itself.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
Ray,
if
you've gotta have a
if there were
standard.
no explanation, if there were like no explanation for lightning, you would then attribute it to God?
No, not me personally. No, I would just say that I don't.
But you
know,
would think it's justified?
Its explanation.
So you think it's
I
justified?
would know that it's justified because it happens.
no.
Okay,
Does it
so can you
justify to
provide
believe in God
Yeah.
based upon no explanation for lightning? That's what Abdul's asking.
What'd you say?
If you're mentioned that people used to believe that lightning is caused by God, but right now we have a scientific explanation. I'm asking you a hypothetical. If there were no scientific explanation for it, right, like at all, and it just happens, do you think it would be justified to believe in God?
No, I wouldn't say that. Just because you don't understand something doesn't mean that you could.
So what's
add
the
God
point of
to the
bringing it up then?
explanation.
I mean, so what's the point?
No, that
So
was in response to them.
Yeah,
No,
but the
because-
point is this:
the-
Ray, if you don't have a standard by which you judge or some type of criteria, then of course you're not going to know or even be able to evaluate the claims.
You'd have to be agnostic. You can't be atheist if you don't know what the evidence is that you're looking for.
Atheist is just a lack of belief. Atheism is not the defined
No, it's not, Ray.
description that
Not
a
in
lot of people
philosophy,
try to
it's
say.
not.
Look up
Sorry,
the
Ray.
Look up the definition.
Oh,
Look
here
up the
we go,
definition.
Ray.
So no,
Here we go.
no. If y'all
We
are
have
gonna tell
looked
me
at
to
the
bring,
definition.
if y'all are gonna tell me to bring evidences of verses, why can't I tell you to bring evidences of your definitions?
No, but listen, okay, so let's work with your definition. So you just lack a belief in God, right? Okay, so I lack a belief in, let's say, aliens, right? So if you ask me what evidence I would require to believe in aliens, I'll tell you, because I have a coherent epistemology. I'll tell you how I come to know things. So how do you, Ray, come to know things? What's your epistemology? I mean, if you don't even know how you come to know things, and you're like, I don't know. I mean,
like I said, I have a lack of belief in theism due to the readings of the books and the texts. And then when it goes down to deism, I have a lack of belief in deism because there's no reason in my mind that, as far as I can see, everything in the universe that we've tried to explain within the past 400 years, we've come really close and expounded upon it.
Okay, stop right there. Stop right there. So you're saying, okay, stop right there.
As opposed to the concept.
Okay, sorry. I don't mean to cut you off. I just want to focus on that point. So you're saying that everything we've come across, we found an explanation, okay, and you're providing that as a No. Okay, whatever. I mean, most things you find. Yeah, just 1 second. Most things we found an explanation. So that's why I asked you earlier. Does that mean that if we didn't find explanations for most things, you would find reason to believe in God?
No, because I still wouldn't have a reason to attribute them to God personally.
So what? Then it's irrelevant. Then you bringing this up about us finding explanations
but Abdul,
as an explanation.
We gotta read this. We gotta read this here to Mr. Ray. Ray, you asked for proof. Okay, we're on Stanford Encyclopedia entry of philosophy on the term atheism and agnosticism. It says right here, definition of atheism. Atheism is typically defined in terms of theism. Theism, in turn, is best understood as a proposition, something that is either true or false. It is often defined as the belief that God exists, but here belief means something believed. It refers to the propositional content of belief, not to the attitude or psychological state of believing. This is why it makes sense to say that theism is true or false and to argue for or against theism. If, however, atheism is defined in terms of theism, and theism is the proposition that God exists, and not the psychological condition of believing that there is a God, then it follows that atheism is not the absence of the psychological condition of believing that God exists. The A in atheism must be understood as negation instead of absence, as not instead of without. Therefore, in philosophy at least, atheism should be construed as the proposition that God does not exist, or more broadly, the proposition that there are no gods. So will you retract your statement, Ray?
Where's your evidence?
So once again, you're talking about a position that I'm not taking. I'm not taking a philosophical position.
No, Ray, you made a claim.
No, you
Ray,
said
you made a claim. You made a claim that this is what atheism is, and then you asked us to give you proof that atheism is something else, and we just did.
Why don't you just do a definition of atheism by like
Ray? We don't do this, Ray. We don't do this like small yellow.
But I'm not holding a philosophical position on this. Do you understand?
Okay, well, you are, because this is a philosophical discussion, Ray.
No, I'm using it as
Ray. Is this
evidence.
a philosophical discussion? Or is this like
not
Dr.
the way
Seuss?
I'm presenting it. I'm not.
Is this a philosophical discussion, Ray?
What is it if it's not a philosophical discussion?
What is it if talking it's not a evidential? I'm talking about scientific concepts.
Come on, Ray. Ray,
God.
this is not Humpty Dumptyism here.
Come like on, a philosophical position would be like your contingency argument. That's a philosophical position that does not necessarily.
Ray, atheism is a philosophical position.
Okay, dude. If you say so.
It is. We just read it out to you on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which is the standard.
It is. Come on, Ray. I didn't put philosophical debates.
This is a philosophical
discussion.
Come on, Ray.
So when I'm talking about evidences,
Ray, don't double down, brother. Just admit.
We can get into the philosophy of evidences. What's your point?
So hold on.
Covers a very broad.
Ray. Yeah,
but Ray, I'm just simply saying, buddy, don't double down. Just admit that you could have been wrong about this, and then we can move on.
Dude, I'm not going to deny that philosophically atheism does hold a God does not exist affirmative, as opposed to in the definition that people use daily, as opposed to philosophical. If you just look it up, Merriam-Webster or Cambridge or wherever you want to, it is lack of belief of God.
Yeah, and if you type in person on Google, you'll get it.
And once again, I never said that God couldn't exist. I said that I have a lack of belief. Now, the difference along with like agnosticism is saying I do not know. Now, that's the reason there's the debates about is atheism the same as agnosticism, because a lack of belief, could be attributed to not knowing.
Right, you're not an atheist.
Okay.
You're not an atheist.
You're an agnostic. In a philosophical sense, you're an agnostic.
Yeah, and you've come onto a philosophy show.
Yes.
You've come onto a philosophy show to say that you're not having a philosophical discussion with people.
No.
The whole point of the show is to have a philosophical discussion. Do you want to have a discussion on philosophy? And if not,
what does everything I've said
answer the question
about evidences?
Answer the question.
Yeah, we can have a philosophical questions if you want. What came on, the first thing that I spoke about was how I do not use the argument of hiddenness. So I went there and was willing to talk about that. It wasn't me that kept changing the topics.
Okay,
No,
right.
because we concluded that topic, and then I asked you the question, why are you an atheist?
Right.
Correct.
And then we
and I
and
started
then you gave
giving
a reason.
and my reasons was about evidence and how if you start at theism and then I spoke about why I don't believe in theism
and then deism
from reading text, and then I spoke about deism, and I spoke about not really attributing things to a god, that because they do tend to have answers that we find out.
So
now,
we do. We have. So
don't,
hold on. So you're saying the reason why you're not an atheist is because we have materialistic explanation.
Wait, the reason I'm not an atheist?
Sorry, the reason why you don't believe in God is because we have materialistic explanation. Is that what you're saying?
That's one of the things, but the other thing is I just don't believe it to be true.
Okay, so why don't you believe it to be true? Let's look at that second reason.
Because I don't think it's necessary. Like, the arguments tend to be that God is a necessary being. If that's your position, I think that you'd have a hard time even presenting that to me in a way that I see it as true / necessary.
So why do see? I think, Ray, this is my personal opinion from your discussion that we've just had here, is you said firstly that you lack belief, secondly that you don't know what the evidence is to define whether God exists, and then you're saying you don't think it's necessary for God to exist.
I said I wouldn't know the evidence of what God exists until it was presented to me, because as of right now, my position is everything that happens in the universe can be explained or possibly explained.
I don't think anything is explained by science.
Okay.
Nothing is
That's
explained.
your position.
I can prove it.
Okay.
Why does water boil? Why does water boil?
What
100
is
degrees
no,
Celsius?
listen. So what do you mean by nothing is explained by science? Let's start there first.
I'm going to give you an example now.
So I'll give you an example. Yeah. Why
no,
does
not
water
an example.
boil?
Give me what you mean.
I mean that fundamentally science is not in the explanation of why things exist. They only really explain how things operate. And to explain how things operate is sufficient for a scientist to operate within the universe. So it doesn't actually explain, for example, why gravity exists, why bodies within space-time causes deformation, which causes a gravitational force that's exerted upon other bodies. There's no explanation as to why that occurs.
Is that the position?
We have an explanation of how it occurs and the relationship that bodies have with other bodies within the universe.
So who's making the argument that science explains why?
You did.
How?
Because you said science has explained things within the universe or events. And I said, no, it doesn't. Because that's not the role of science.
No,
Science only explains to me how things operate. Yeah, how things operate. They don't explain to me why they fundamentally operate in that way.
Yeah, but that doesn't actually go to my position.
So, for example, if I ask you the question, why is there lightning? Why is there lightning? You're going to talk about electrical fields, aren't you? And then if I ask you the question, why do you have electrical fields? You might talk about forces, electromagnetic forces. And then I'm going to ask the question, why is there electromagnetic forces? And then you're going to say, well, they're fundamental forces. It's a brute contingency.
Well, no, it would be electrical forces because of like the core of the earth.
Yeah, but I can keep asking the question why.
Yeah, but that doesn't.
Because ultimately, you're going to get
doesn't-
to a question about fundamental forces of the universe. The
But that
four
doesn't-
fundamental
that
forces
doesn't-
of the universe. One's electromagnetism.
That doesn't actually address anything that I talked about. That's
It
like a red
does.
herring.
It does.
No,
it does.
what you're trying to do is say that, okay, science only talks about the action in a way, right? It only tells you how something occurs. It doesn't tell you why. Is that your position?
Yeah.
So what? What then?
So look at your question. Why is there lightning? If you're saying that science doesn't explain the why, you are saying that science doesn't explain the why, it only explains the how, then it's not providing an explanation, is it?
No, it is. You realize there's different forms of explanation, right? Like
I do understand there's different forms of explanation.
So then you
But we're
can't
asking the
justify
why
your statement
explanation.
that it doesn't.
So why the why explanation of why lightning strikes, does science explain it?
I
does
don't
it
know
differ?
enough about. I don't know enough about meteorology. I guess.
Do you believe in brute contingent facts?
Answer.
Do you believe in brute contingent facts?
So explain that.
So brute contingent facts are things where we are irreducible to any other explanation beyond that explanation. That there are things within the universe that you cannot explain anything. You cannot explain further. That we just have to accept.
I don't know. There's no way to actually prove that though until the end of time.
No. So
no,
at the moment, the way science works. So
at the moment we don't know everything.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree.
That's fine.
So
you were
but that's
appealing
not
to
saying
science.
In the future,
you were appealing to
won't
science.
know.
You were appealing to science, and you were saying science in the last 400 years has given all these explanations of why. And I'm saying actually, science at this moment in time has to come to brute contingent facts, and that assumes them to be true. Has no further explanation for them because maybe they've reached epistemic limits of science. Maybe they might not have reached the epistemic limits of science, but at the moment they have to assume these things, and then from these assumptions, they then try to provide explanations of how other things operate based upon these brute contingent facts of the universe.
Your claim only works if, like, let's say tomorrow everything ends. And then there's no further learning.
No, Ray.
No.
I'm using
Ray,
your argument. You said
can I ask you, Ray?
the last 400 years, we have science explaining things. I'm saying science doesn't explain why things. It reduces to brute contingent facts at this moment in time. So forget about the last 400 years. All those 400 years up to now, we still have these brute contingent facts. We have to assume, like laws of thermodynamics, how gravity or why gravity operates the way it does. Yeah. We have to assume these things. That's what science has reduced us to these brute contingent facts at this moment in time. Maybe they'll extend it in the future and get further explanations. The argument is,
but then I don't feel like the argument is relevant to me.
Claim. That's a faith claim now.
No, that argument isn't relative to me because what I'm speaking about is the possibility of it, right? Now, it's not really faith-based like you're saying. Faith is the belief without evidence. Faith
no, it's not. No, it's not, Ray. So now should we have to show you that definition too, Ray? Come on, brother. Come on. Why so serious?
Then tell me what the definition is so I can go off of your definition.
Yeah, we don't believe that faith, we just take it without evidence. That's not our position at all. In fact, the Quran says that you shouldn't believe anything. That doesn't mean anything. Ray, I'm trying to explain something to you. The Quran says that you shouldn't believe anything without knowledge.
You need evidence.
That still doesn't.
You need evidence.
You need evidence.
Iman is a trust. Iman is a trust.
So it still doesn't
it's a trust
matter, right?
It's a trust based on evidence.
Tasdiq al-jazim.
Now that's your personal belief system. because
No.
your holy book,
No.
your holy
Ray, you're
book
talking to
addressed that
4
concept.
Muslims. What are we doing here? We're not. Who are you talking to?
Okay, Ray, I think, look, you're making a lot of statements. You seem to be quite confident in your statements, but I think the problem is that I think you are too confident to what you actually know. You made mistakes about what the Quran says about body parts, na'udhu billah. You made
He will
comments
reveal his
about
shin.
the Sahaba.
He will reveal his shin.
And Abdul already explained.
And Ray, we've had the upper hand in this discussion.
Yeah, Ray, we already
that's your
explained that it's
Ray, you
it
didn't
can
even
be
get the
used as a
joke. It went over your head.
metaphor. So that Abdul already explained the. It went over my head a bit there, Jake, as well. Actually,
Well, you know, I've got dry humor, folks. What can I say?
Yeah,
I thought the Brits had dry humor too.
Well, I
What's
have
going
tried,
on?
yeah. But yeah. So Ray, Abdul's already explained that point to you. Yeah, and then you didn't have a reference for it. Then you claimed about Sahaba. You didn't have a reference for that. Then you claimed that science answers all these questions, and I said
And
no,
he
it doesn't.
And he moaned about us not giving.
Wait, when did I?
Then you claimed.
And then we
Wait,
showed
when did I say
atheism.
that
We showed the
science-
definition of atheism, and you're wrong about that.
All I'm saying, Ray, is this: I think you're too confident for the knowledge that you've actually got. I think a bit of humbleness about your position.
I think it's ironic that
It is.
you are calling me saying that I'm too confident when you pretty much base your whole belief system off of faith of a miracle.
He-Man.
No, why are you just
Like
keep
the
making
Quran.
these
You
assertions.
keep making these
because
claims.
You're just
my
making
friend.
these
Before I
assertions.
even came on here, you used an example about how the Quran is a miracle because a man in 7th century Arabia who was a poet said that he knows more about Arabic and the poetry and this and that, and there's no way that it could have came from anything but God.
Right, so does it follow from that? Does it follow from when Sharif made that statement that that's the only thing that we base our belief system on?
Well, I
Does
mean,
it? No, it doesn't. Don't talk
that's-
nonsense,
it's-
mate.
it's
Don't talk
definitely
nonsense. You're talking rubbish.
It's definitely one of the biggest claims that Muslims use as their belief is that the Quran is a miracle.
Yeah.
Who are you talking to? Are you talking to the Muslims? Are you talking to the Muslims here, or are you talking to Abdul, Jake, Yusuf, and Sharif?
Well, it's also the fact that you wouldn't have your belief without the Quran.
You're right. Yeah, we wouldn't have the belief. We wouldn't have the belief in the prophethood of the messengership without the Quran. But you can still have belief in the Creator without the Quran. The problem that you have, Ray, is this: is you're talking about things like science answers all questions. Science answers the questions about why lightning occurs. And when I ask you the question, well, what is the scientific answer? You're like, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not studied that.
No, I said I didn't want to speak on it because I'm not that knowledgeable. On the subject.
Exactly. You're not knowledgeable on the subject.
No,
and then when I explain
to
you, that things reduce back to a brute contingent reality or facts, this is what science has to premise upon these brute contingent facts. You were like, yeah, but in the future we might be able to prove, something. We might have to get away from these brute contingent facts. But I'm saying your claim was because science has answered X, Y, Z questions, therefore it will answer all questions. I'm saying it hasn't even answered any fundamental question.
I never said that it will. I said that there's reason to think that it will. There's a reason to say that it is possible that it will. I never said that it is absolute.
Yeah.
So,
as a final question, what reason do you think it will answer?
Because just within the short time that we have actually applied scientific method in the causes of humans, we have actually advanced in our knowledge of the universe, as opposed to the days.
Were you involved in that? Why so religious? Were you at the forefront of all of that?
Let Ray finish. Sorry, one second.
So as opposed to the days of prophets getting sent messages from the God that didn't really improve life standards at all.
Right. Okay.
Like you can make arguments that for the people that were not ever part of the religions that these scriptures were sent from, their lifestyles were drastically altered in the negative by the people who follow that religion.
Ray, thank you very much. I think obviously we fundamentally disagree. I don't think you're really that interested in engaging in the arguments, and I think you're changing your position, to be honest. I don't think you're sincere in the discussion, but appreciate you coming on.
How am I changing my position?
Because you
what
originally
do you think my
argued,
position is?
Ray, there's no point discussing any further. I'll be honest with you. Yeah. Appreciate you coming on, though. Thank you. Sorry, man. I'm just thinking we're just going to go around in circles on this. Yeah. Like I said, I think the problem is some people are too confident in their positions. And, and he's going, oh, it's ironic. You Muslims, you believe in, you have a quote unquote faith, yeah? And yet he's appealing to faith in science will answer all questions. When I said, and I made a very bold claim, yeah, and I say this to some atheists sometimes just to make them think that science hasn't answered any why questions. Yet, why is there lightning? Science doesn't answer that question. It just answers how the universe operates. And we get more details about how the universe operates. And we can use that details to operate and manipulate things or materials within the universe based upon how the laws operate. But it doesn't explain why they operate in the way that they do, and that's really fundamental. And there's a really interesting statement that Neil Tyson deGrasse, or was it Neil deGrasse Tyson? I always get it.
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Neil deGrasse Tyson. He was asked a question on Joe Rogan's podcast where he was asked about what is gravity. Yeah, what is it? Joe was like that type of person, like, what is it? Yeah, that simple man on the street. And Neil deGrasse Tyson says, well, in science, it's not explaining why something occurs. It's simply explaining how it occurs. And if we've explained how, then that's sufficient for us, really. So we don't really know why or what it really is. We're just happy to know how it works, how it operates. And that's, that's the epistemic limits that we have. So there are no real questions of why fundamentally that's being answered. It's deferring. At best, it defers the why question or why explanation to something else until you get to a brute contingent fact. A lot of atheists don't like to acknowledge that point because it sort of explodes their worldview. Anybody else, Yusuf?
Yes.
Hello, how you doing tonight?
Oh, how you doing, Eric?
I'm doing fine.
Good to see you.
I was enjoying your broadcast. I was enjoying listening to talk to the atheists there. That was fun.
Yes. Eric is somebody that we've spoken to a couple of times on the Facebook calls, although we've not spoken for a while. What was your thoughts about the topic at hand, which was divine hiddenness? You're a theist, aren't you, Eric?
I am a theist, and I don't think it's. I actually don't think the atheist has a good argument against theism at all. I think, as a matter of fact, atheism is a rather foolish position to hold. I can understand if somebody has a position of an agnostic. To me, that makes a lot more sense than somebody choosing the position of an atheist. And in my opinion, most atheists don't even know what atheism is. They accept the title of atheist without realizing that their position is probably agnostic. And I think a lot of them choose the position of atheism, though, out of, I don't know what it could be. Maybe arrogance, maybe rebellion, maybe anger against God. I think there are very few real atheists. Although I do note a few that are very sincere in their atheism. So I don't find fault with them. They're able to discuss things rationally and civilly. But I do think it's rather funny that they choose to define themselves as somebody that simply lacks belief. A ping pong ball lacks belief, So that's a rather foolish position, I think. But I was enjoying your show. I would like to add, though, if you guys don't mind, I have to admit, when it comes to philosophy, I'm a novice, and you guys would leave me in the dirt. You often do. That's why I love listening to Abdul and you guys sitting around talking philosophy, because I learn. But When it comes to science and theology, though, I really think that we have reason to believe that there's a God, and we have scientific reason to believe that there's a God. For instance, there's the science of biogenesis, and that's a completely observable science, and 1 billion times a day. It doesn't matter if it's bacteria, it doesn't matter if it's insects or animals. We see that life only comes from life. That's the only way it ever comes about. We never see life just randomly forming and popping to life. It just doesn't happen. It's a rather absurd idea. And it doesn't matter how they try to bring it about in the laboratory. It just never comes about.
What if they say, Eric, that one day scientists will create life in a lab? Would that now disprove your position?
No. I guess it possibly could happen, but my position is that it's simply we never observe it happening in nature or in the lab, and so it's far more likely there's a God. And then when they say God isn't even God is a supernatural object that we can't even detect God with scientific means. So why even ask the God question in science? But I think dark matter and dark energy prove that wrong. Dark matter and dark energy you could almost consider a supernatural object because it's invisible. It's not a tangible object that you can touch and feel, and yet it's supposed to be omnipresent. It holds all of creation together. It's expanding the universe. And, these are things that these are attributes that God is supposed to have.
Yeah.
So, science is acknowledging a force that we would call God if under any other circumstance.
See, what's interesting, Eric, is, the previous caller, and I think it was, he wasn't really listening. I don't think he was going to get anywhere. But he was trying to say something like religion doesn't, it has no positive impact. But one thing that he doesn't realize is what religion and what theism gives you. It gives you a grounding for science. So we understand that science is where you have predictable patterns, that future events will follow past experience. Now, from a purely materialistic point of view, you can't say that there are patterns within the universe. But from a theistic point of view, and certainly like Christianity and also Islam pushes this point, which is that God created the universe and the world with a particular system, with a particular order. So for Christian scientists or Muslim scientists, it was always a case of we would investigate what that order is, what that pattern is. And so we're using the scientific method, which is predicated on this idea that the universe is predictable and follows patterns, because we have a theological justification for it. Yeah. So this is what he doesn't realize, that, how religion, how Islam, or, like your particular faith, Christianity, how it forms a particular foundation by which we then operate. Yeah? So they want to take all the benefits, quote unquote, of theism, but then try to discard it at the end.
That's very true, too. And I've also observed with atheists, they reverse the roles. And the roles that they assign to theists are the roles that they themselves embrace. And the roles that they claim to embrace are the roles that we actually fulfill. For instance, they claim that our faith is blind. We have faith in things that there's absolutely no evidence for. And that's just a completely absurd claim. I'm sure you guys are like me. You have faith in what you've seen. Your faith in God would be the same faith that I have. I believe that the same faith when you're walking to a light switch to flip that light switch on, you're walking to that switch in faith. You're about to flip that on. You never stop and question whether or not that light is going to turn on. You just walk over there and flip it. You know it's going to turn on.
You have a trust.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not based on a lack of evidence, though. It's
That's
like
exactly
you do
right.
have reasons for that approach towards a light switch with faith.
That's right. It's based on what we've seen.
It's not going to blow up or electrocute you or harm you in any way, or that it'll just turn on at all.
Exactly. On the other hand, you take the atheist faith in abiogenesis, brother, that's a blind faith. Absolutely.
Oh yeah,
blind.
100%. I agree with you, 100%, Eric, because I've used that argument as well with atheists. Because atheists, they say, oh well, because the reason why they like to have this agnostic but call themselves atheists is because they're trying to say we have no metaphysical commitments, we have no beliefs, we're just neutral, we're just trying to look for evidence. And so I always bring up the abiogenesis point, and I always say, look, abiogenesis, do you believe it's true or not? And they think about it, and then I explain life from non-life. Or do you think that it's always the case that life, as a result, either directly or indirectly, was caused by something that's living? Then they'd have to say, well, yeah, it has to be abiogenesis. Okay, what evidence have you got? Zero. Okay, so you're basing it upon what? Your metaphysical commitment of materialism, that ultimately everything is explained by physical, non-conscious, non-living matter. Yeah. And as soon as you explain to that, I think some of them, they have a light bulb moment and think, oh yeah, that's true. I actually do make these leaps of faith when it comes to certain beliefs about materialism. And so you see this a lot. And I think the problem with a lot of people is, and we can also fall into this, is that we don't realize what our hidden assumptions are, what our presuppositions or metaphysical commitments that we hold and that we don't really question. And it's about getting to really understand that and then be critical of our own metaphysical assumptions, and obviously get atheists to do that in order to realize where their beliefs are.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the atheist position is just really one of absurdity all the way around. The claims that you actually hear atheists make are absurd. Like, atheism isn't a belief system. I hear that all the time. I say, absolutely, atheism is not a belief system in itself, but yet it corners you into a belief system that you have to embrace. You're forced to embrace it. You have no other choice. You can't believe in creation, so you have to believe in abiogenesis. You can't believe that God created animals after their own kind, so you have to believe in evolution, even if you never see one thing evolving into another kind of animal outside of their family, for instance. If you choose family and genus and species and that sort of thing, you just never see that, and you can't prove it in the fossil record. They say, well, we can prove common ancestors in the fossil record. Well, no, you can't. You can hypothesize it. You can put it all on a phylogenetic tree, but that's all complete hypothesis. And now, if you want to falsify that, you have to have the opportunity to prove it false, potentially prove it false. And you can't do that without the DNA. You cannot test these families. And then they say, well, morphology. And I say, well, morphology is nothing, dude. The dire wolf is a perfect example of why you cannot use morphology to assign an ancestry. It was taught for decades that the dire wolf was an ancestor to the wolf families, but now we know we have the DNA from the dire wolf. We've sequenced it, and they've proven that it's a completely different line from our wolves. So it's not the ancestor of the wolves. So the whole thing is completely hypothetical, and there's just no way they can falsify any of that. So they are cornered into a belief system that they have to hold to.
Cool. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate you coming on and your support for the channel.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah. Really appreciate you coming on. We'll go to another guest, but hopefully we'll speak to you again, and hopefully you'll tune in again and subscribe to our channel.
I'm subbing now. Bye-bye.
Okay. Excellent. Thanks.
All right, take care. What is that? Oh,
Eric's got a really interesting.
I did an Abdul.
It's no longer a Yusuf. It's an Abdul now, isn't it?
It was never a Yusuf.
Was it not?
No, Jake, he did it. He did it quite a lot when he first got his mic. He was always on mute.
That was the first time. Come on, give me a break.
That was a good couple of times.
Somebody in the chat, Mr. John Lee, He had an important comment here that I wanted to put because I think some people are going to say this as well. I'm a little disappointed that divine hiddenness hasn't been discussed at all. That's why I tuned in. Well, I responded. I posted a long message. I posted
an hour.
I said, look, John Lee, we spoke about it for the first hour. We explained what the argument is and why we think it doesn't work. We then invited atheists on to defend the argument. Unfortunately, none of them really agreed with the divine hiddenness argument and went into proof for God. This is ultimately where it will always go. Hence why divine hiddenness isn't a good independent argument against God.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you want us to do?
Now he can jump on. If you want.
No, he's not an atheist.
He's a Christian.
He's a Christian.
He's a Christian.
He's just saying that nobody came on to really debate divine hiddenness. I mean, what do you want us to do?
There's no one even in the back now.
Yeah, it's not.
It's always good just for the audience for the first.
I think it's evidence of
the
fact. Yeah, I think it's evidence of the fact that it's not a good independent argument against God by the fact that even the atheists that came on didn't generally support it, and it always is going to go back into proof for God anyway. So it's
So,
but like I was just going to say, just go on. Sorry, Yusuf.
I was just going to say before we forget, Karlos sent me his question up. I can't see the whole thing. Let me get rid of that thing at the bottom. So the first thing he mentioned was he was asking about the difference between our current times versus the people of the time who benefited from miracles and revelation. So just in answer to that as well, I think one of the reasons is because usually these miracles, like Sharif mentioned, are associated with prophets. And we know from the Islamic perspective, for example, that Muhammad is the final prophet and the final messenger. And if he is the final prophet, final messenger, then it would make sense as well from that perspective that there wouldn't be any miracles as well following on from him until those where the Antichrist or the Dajjal and those that have been prophesied have been mentioned. And at that point, obviously, these miracles or these things that you see would be in evidence of the times that you're in, i.e. the end times, that the Dajjal is there. And so the miracles here would then obviously operate in a very particular way. And we're waiting for that moment now. And so within the Islamic paradigm, at least, that's going to be a clue of a particular moment in time and who we're dealing with, and that this person is a false prophet. That is the Antichrist, the Dajjal, or a false Messiah. So I don't know if anyone wants to add to that or respond to that section in particular.
I don't know if you touched upon what I said earlier, because I just want to quickly reiterate that if you're looking for the kind of miracle that is going to be something repeatable and testable, and you know that every time you pray for $1 million, it just pops up in your living room, that was never the concept of miracle. So that's never going to be repeated because it never happened. But so the idea is that miracles are also going to be something that, you know, the atheist is going to question, and there are, you know, claims to miracles these days. And the Quran sort of has this theme where, although it does take miracles seriously, it reports them. Also, it makes it clear that it itself, the Quran itself, is a sign for mankind and puts forward the inimitability challenge. Although it does all that, it kind of takes this request for miracles very like it almost belittles it. Like there's a verse where Allah responds and says, وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ أَفَلَا يُبْصِرُونَ, right? And in their own selves, right? In their own selves, do they not look? Do they not see? Right? It actually starts off with, you know, signs of nature and everything, and it speaks about the world and says that you can look around you and look within yourselves and see the signs. Now, granted, I know you're not convinced with that, Karlos, but then the idea is that the evidence is always going to be in that way, not in the manner that you're thinking that, you know, every time you pray for $1 million is going to be there, because then in that way, as I mentioned earlier, it's not going to be really a test. Your acts won't be morally significant, and the existence of God would be as obvious as 1 + 1 = 2. The whole world would be praying for $1 million and getting it. The existence of God would be as much a fact as anything. So, you know, considering there's eternal hell out there, there is no morally significant act you can do because you got the gun to your head, and it's not just a gun to your head; it's eternal hell that you can see, you can witness every day in your living room. So, I mean, if that's what you're asking for, then it kind of defeats the purpose of the theistic narrative. So yeah, so miracles are more signs, and that's really the word used in the Quran. It's a sign. It's always going to be a sign, and a sign of something is not going to be the thing itself. So
yeah, I didn't think on the issue of the Quran being a living miracle. Obviously, we believe it's a miracle, but the problem is that you have to study it. Yeah, what the Quranic claim is, and just like, for example, when it comes to the belief in a creator, you have to think about it deeply. So same thing with regards to the Quran. You know, if you understand ilm al-balagha, you would understand, you know, how you construct meaningful sentences. You would understand ilm al-ma'ani, ilm al-badi, ilm al-bayan, sorry. So you understand these sciences that the Quran has and utilizes, and how these are beyond. But like I said, it requires some further investigation, and you know, I encourage a lot of Muslims to do that. But going back to the specific part, the first part where he says that I think it was addressed to Jake about temporal cause and eternal effect, and he's saying, well, we don't have any, you know, we don't have what was he saying? He was saying we don't have sufficient evidence.
He doesn't think we can make claims. Can you go back to the image here?
Yes.
At the bottom, he said, essentially, using epistemology to come to ontological conclusions is a category error. This is something I've alluded to before. Therefore, a natural, unconscious, necessary existence as the cause of our temporal universe is not a logical impossibility. Like when his statement there, using epistemology to come to ontological conclusions is a category error. This is just T-jump, man. This guy. You watch. Listen. I'm going to tell you something, Karlos. You seem like a nice enough guy, buddy. But stop watching T-jump. You got a better chance watching cartoons and then coming up with something meaningful than watching T-jump. I'm sorry to tell you, and I can see it in your statements, the things that you say. I watch and I've heard enough T-jump to see that you're regurgitating T-jump's rubbish and nonsense. So please stop watching T-jump, watch some more Tap, and maybe we can get further. But the point here is that the statement you're making about using epistemology to talk about ontology, well, that's what you're doing. Even what Abdul mentioned earlier about the problem of other minds or the reality of the external world, what do you think you're doing? Do you think that other minds exist? Do you think that I'm talking to you right now? Do you think that the external world is real? Well, if you do, what does that tell you? That tells you that you're making ontological statements based on your own epistemology, i.e., what seems to be the case or what seems to be evidence for X is evidence for X, and it seems that X is true. That's what you're doing when you have these philosophical conclusions about other things. So the problem is that now you're using that for other things, but when it comes to this other thing, you're inconsistent. You don't want to apply it there. You don't want to say, what seems to be the case actually probably is the case, because you're uncomfortable with the conclusion that it's going to lead to. And I'm sorry, but that's just inconsistent. And that statement, once again, is just T-jump nonsense.
Yeah, I think it's just to reiterate that point as well, is that you got to have, if as best as possible anyway, consistency in your epistemology. So if you're gonna hold certain views, so for example, like Abdul gave the example that we come to the conclusion of other minds because of indeterminate acts of an individual or of a body. Yeah, so a non-determinate act of a body will conclude that the person has will. Yeah, has agent causation. They cause what they want to do. So if you're going to use that now, you're going to use it consistently. Yeah, you can't use it in one respect to infer other minds of other human beings or animals, and then say, well, there's this.
It's not a category error. Like, how are you going to say it's a category error?
And just the whole just one thing to say about the whole epistemology thing.
watch all areas that don't do echo chambers. I'm not telling you to do an echo chamber, but I'm telling you not to watch T-Jump. So there's a difference. You don't have to do echo chambers, and we don't do echo chambers. We invite people like you guys on. I don't do echo chambers either. I go on Clubhouse. I talk to Hindus, atheists, Quran, Shia, all different kind of stuff. I mean, what are you talking?
Yeah. Just to point on the whole epistemology thing. I mean, there aren't really too many options about how the universe or the cosmos or the contingent reality could have come into being, right? Sure. I mean, in terms of how that mechanistically or physically may have happened, or what the actual mechanistic explanation is, if there is one, of course there could be like an endless number of explanations. But then in terms of like purely logical categories, there aren't so many options. I mean, if you're either going to say, I mean, you can be agnostic about it, but then you can be agnostic and still say that it's either going to be some kind of brute contingency, as in like there's just this contingent reality that is has its arbitrary limits. It could have been otherwise. It has these properties, these similar properties to other things that we identify as contingent, or it's going to be something that's not that, right? So it's either that or it's not that, right? Now, if it's that, if it has the same properties of contingent things, then it might boil down to intuition. But then, I mean, if you say the just to give it an example to simplify it, if you say that the necessary existence or the explanation for reality is some red ball, right? So it's a very arbitrary thing. It's just random. It's arbitrary, limited, right? And it has these certain limited causal powers. Well, I think epistemically, from our epistemic viewpoint at least, right, we're going to look at that. We're going to look at these certain properties, and we're going to ask the very same questions we ask about things around us. And science, you might want to say that, it could not have an. It could be the case that it doesn't have an explanation, but that isn't how we think. So at least from an epistemic perspective, it's going to be analogous to us looking at the reality around us, and maybe looking at a certain phenomenon, and somebody coming and telling you, "Hey, there is no explanation beyond it." Right? It's there is no explanation to this thing and the properties it has, and I think even scientists, especially cosmologists, they don't like these answers. They don't like these arbitrary answers. I think we fundamentally assume there's an explanation, right? And you could say whatever you want. You could say that assumption is based on experience. You could take an empirical route. Whatever it is you do, that second option, because I think there are two options. It's either a contingent reality as a whole, or a non-contingent reality, so contingent explanation, brute contingency, or necessity. And I think that first one, whatever causal principle or explanatory principle you have in your epistemology, it's always going to be the same as us looking at something in reality and positing that there might not be an explanation for it. I mean, on the atheistic view that the brute contingency is all there is. But then a lot of us don't do that. I'm just trying to be very modest here. I mean, it's philosophers and physicists, cosmologists, when it comes to ultimate explanations, we don't do that, because whenever we look at something that is limited, whenever we look at something that has certain arbitrary properties, we explain. We try to look for an explanation. And you might say, well, everything we experience has arbitrary properties, and so it's inductive. Well, that's the whole point. The whole point is that that's how we operate. So I think with that first option, it's just in principle. I mean, you don't need to wait for future investigations. In principle, you couldn't be faced with a situation where that naturalistic necessary thing, a hypothetical naturalistic necessary thing, isn't looked at from our human perspective in the same with the same epistemic lens as we look at other contingent things. It's just the same. It's just it's an in principle thing, really. Considering it's the same, well, I think that many of us will go for that second option and say, wait a second, that has an explanation. I don't even care if you just call it intuition. It's just being consistent, I think, in my own view. And then the necessary explanation is going to be a necessary thing. And then from there, you're going to move towards these discussions about will and other minds and, eternal cause, finite effect, all these kinds of stuff. But to say we can't know anything, well, I think the issue is we already know stuff that are directly related to the things we as theists claim to know about ultimate reality. It's actually stems from these very basic things we know, and it's directly analogous to the claims we make about ultimate reality. So I think this extreme skepticism, fine, you can be skeptical. That it's your prerogative, and even on the Islamic view, if you're sincere and you just can't see it, I have no problem with that. But to say we can't say anything, well, I just think that's blatantly false. Even from an atheistic perspective, a lot of people would argue that evolutionarily speaking, we have evolved to believe in God. So the intuition is there. But I'm not just speaking about intuition here. I'm speaking about the foundation of our epistemology and how it directly links to the claims that we do make as theists about ultimate reality. So
yeah, I think also just from consistency point of view, from just saying, okay, we observe things that are not causally caused to act, we infer will. So just from an inductive point of view, it makes sense that if we come to a conclusion of a necessary being that causally causes an act, we're going to infer will. You have warrant to hold that position. And that's why I said, on what basis is he justifying that the necessary being doesn't have a will? He has to have an explanation for that. Now, if he's being on the fence and he's saying, I'm agnostic, and on the one hand, you've got 4, 5, 6 arguments saying there is a will, and he has not one defeater to those arguments, then he should be on the position of saying, well, actually, my inclinations would be that the necessary being has a will, and therefore is a God. That's where his position, that's where the following of the argument and the evidence should push him towards.
Yep. And so I think considering we have no more guests and
last thing here, philosophy is epistemology and on its own are just hypotheses. Science is the next step from a hypothesis. No, it's not. I mean, it's just wrong, bro. I mean, even your statement right there, like
epistemology. I mean, the argument itself isn't epistemology. You use a certain argument to. You use epistemology to make a certain argument.
Just saying, just talking philosophy doesn't get you anywhere. That's his point. You need scientific confirmation for philosophical points. That's basically what he's saying.
Yeah. And the point is, like, if you talk about like in science relies on rational inference as well, right? So I mean, so you want an empirical basis for the stuff we're talking about? Well, there is an empirical basis. Everything around you. So we make rational inferences from that. Doesn't make it scientific because it doesn't adhere to the methodology.
Yeah, but I'm saying he's not consistent with that, Abdul. He does he believes in so many things without scientific confirmation.
Yes, like other minds and external world realism and stuff like that. Yep. So I think we've went on for a bit and we've really got off topic because I think most of our atheist guests didn't really challenge the argument. So I think if you guys have any last words, you can go for it, and then we can end the stream. Inshallah.
Yeah, the divine hiddenness argument is bunk. It's terrible. I think that was demonstrated by the fact that nobody really came on, even the atheists, to come on and defend the argument, and it's based on assumptions that we're free to reject. And again, it just points back to whether or not there actually is sufficient evidence for God. And in that case, it's not even a tiebreaker. It doesn't even really operate in any meaningful way in the philosophical discussion, Mr. Ray. But
I mean, I'd give it second place after the problem of evil. And I mean, reason for that is because, well, if you look at it just in a vacuum, if you just think of, hey, this intelligent God who is all loving. And you look at a world where there are non-resisting non-believers. Well, that in a vacuum, fine, okay, you wouldn't expect that. That thought alone doesn't predict that. But I mean, that's not the whole story, really. If it's a critique of theism, I think you need to take the theistic narrative into account. Yusuf, any final words?
No, I think we've covered pretty much everything. I'm happy to leave it there.
Okay, Sharif, any final words? Okay, Jazakumullah khair, everybody, for joining. Thank you so much for joining. Thanks to the panelists. Thanks to everybody. And inshallah, we'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. حي على